Good evening. The September 26th Board of Education meeting is now in session. Please rise for the invocation. O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies, being ever mindful of your guidance, stir us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding. The pledge. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Welcome to this meeting of the Board of Education. This meeting is being televised live on AACPS TV and live streamed on the internet. General information and protocols for the meeting are posted on the sign by the doorway as you enter the room, so please make sure you read those if you have not already. Item 2.03 is approval of the minutes. If there are no changes or amendments, they will stand approved. Okay, item 2.04 is establish agenda order, and the agenda stands as posted. Item 2.05 is board recognitions, and we do have some recognitions, and if the board will go down to the well. Not yet? Oh, I'm sorry. Board, don't go down to the well. They'll call us down in a minute.
I could have improvised. Good evening. I am Christiana Walsh, Coordinator of Health, Physical Education, and Dance. With me tonight is Denise Harbaugh from the American Heart Association. Before going any further with tonight's recognition, I'd like to ask members of the board and Dr. Arlano to please come forward. It's like, I would have... Members of the board and Dr. Arlano, as you know, employee and student wellness are a key component of our school system's strategic plan. As part of that effort to emphasize wellness and to help others, schools across our county participate in American Heart Association events each year. We are very proud of this partnership and of the many ways in which it aids our students, our staff, and our communities. And now, Denise will tell you more about some of our outstanding schools and their efforts.
Good evening. Tonight we are here to recognize the top 3 participating schools from last year. These 3 schools went above and beyond to encourage their students to get physically active, eat healthier, and to make heart health a priority. Students at these schools were encouraged to be physically active, make smart nutritional choices, and to take a heart-healthy pledge, which asked them to either drink more water instead of sugary beverages, to eat a fruit or vegetable at every meal, and to take part in an additional 60 minutes of physical activity every day. So without further ado, recognizing our schools, I'd like to mention Bodkin Elementary is our number 3 Jump Rope for Heart school. It was led by Principal Rachel Amstutz and teacher Michelle Corey. 98 students took the Heart Healthy Pledge, and they raised $17,642 in life-saving funding. Our number 2 Jump Rope for Heart school is Shady Side Elementary, led by Principal Jeff Casey and teacher Brittany Pastrana. More than 110 students took the Heart Healthy Pledge, and they raised $18,082 in vital donations. And our number 1 Jump Rope for Heart school in Anne Arundel County last year was Crofton Woods Elementary, led by Principal Lynn Beerus and teacher Karen Webster, who has since retired, and Mr. Ken Fowler. More than 175 students took a pledge to be heart healthy. Along with that, they raised $20,326 in life-saving donations. I'd also like to mention Anne Arundel County is the number 5 school district in the state of Maryland for raising donations for the American Heart Association. The district raised $259,271 last year alone. We at the American Heart Association could not do what we do every day without your support, and for that we are extremely grateful. Representatives from all three of our top schools are with us tonight. As they come forward, please join me in saluting their efforts on the behalf of Anne Arundel County.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Yes. Mr. Casey, always a pleasure. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Thanks.
Now we go back up. Okay, we go back. Well, we got to put it shorter for sure. I'm going to put you on the end. Okay.
Oh, on the end.
I don't want you covering anybody's head. There. Maybe I don't want it to look like that. You won't be able to see everybody. There we go. Well, that was great. So, item 2.06 is school and community highlights. Anyone from the board? Dr. Arlotto.
Thank you, Mrs. Hummer. I typically do not join in on this part of the evening. This is part of the evening for the board to really celebrate the time they've been out in schools and out in the community. But I am so excited about an event that occurred last night that I just can't contain myself. So we're going to have to deal with it. Last night, we cut the ribbon on our first official student-run business venture in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Our students opened the cafe at Maryland Hall. For those of you that are familiar with Maryland Hall, on the second level, the main level, there is cafe space that was built many years ago, and a number of businesses have come and gone. But through some hard work and dedication and vision of Maureen McMahon and many of her staff, we have put together a cafe that is now serving. It's open 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, noon to 7, and 6:30, and Saturdays 9 to noon. And they're serving a variety of different sandwiches and salads, as well as pastries and cakes made by the students at Cat South in the culinary program. So they are not only baking and cooking, but they are interning and running the business. They're learning how to market. They're learning how to develop the appropriate costs. They're running the cafe, and we cut the ribbon last night, and it's fabulous. In addition to that, the cafe has art space where our performing and visual art students will be displaying their art throughout the year. And on Thursday evenings, pretty soon, we'll be starting up some cafe music where our PBA students will be performing in the cafe on Thursday evenings. And so if you're ever in and around and you're looking near Maryland Hall and you're looking for a place to stop in and have a cup of coffee or a Danish or a salad or sandwich, introduce yourself to our students because they are awesome. And so I'm sorry, I just couldn't contain myself. It was a fabulous night, and it's a great intersection of partnership with Maryland Hall, as well as our dedication to really creating opportunities for students. We as a staff talk a lot about creating opportunities, and this is yet another opportunity outside the classroom that connects them to the real world learning that's happening in the classroom. And so just a plug for the great kids and the work at Maryland Hall, and stop by the cafe at Maryland Hall. So thank you.
So, and speaking of food services, so last week I had the opportunity to represent Anne Arundel County and the National School Board Association in a roundtable meeting with Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue, and we were talking about the school nutrition programs and various things that we had representatives from all over the country there who were sharing things, improvements we'd like to see in the law regarding school lunches and school meals and some things that can help us to better serve our kids. And it was a great opportunity also just to hear challenges different parts of the country have. We shared a lot of them, but there was a representative from South Dakota who talked about how the great difficulty they had serving fresh fruit to their children because they can't get it. By the time they get it, the quality is very poor, and we're very fortunate over here. So it's interesting to hear from other people around the country, but also to speak up for all the school boards around and talk about ways that we could better meet the nutrition needs of our students. So item 2.07 is the CRASC report.
Good evening, President Hummer, members of the board, and Dr. Orlato. My name is Savannah Quick. I attend Northeast High School, and I'm Secretary of Education for CRASC. On September 11th and 12th, we hosted the initial session of our middle school leadership series at Arlington Echo. Approximately 130 students from 15 middle schools across the county completed the initiative and confidence course, working on relationship building, communication, and problem solving as a team. On September 29th, members of CRASC will attend the 2018 MSEA Early Career Educator Summit to take part in a panel discussion regarding the positive impact that educators have had on our lives and how they have helped us to succeed. Since reconvening, we have begun the process of revising our platform and drafting our new constitution. We have also began planning several general assemblies. Our first will be in November, focusing on connecting military-dependent families to their communities. We are collaborating with Naval Support Annapolis and Miss Chobani. The 2018-2019 year has officially kicked off, and with it comes the all-too-exciting back-to-school nights. Our executive team members have attended these events to provide information about CRASC. We're excited to see what the 2018-2019 year brings for our awesome AACPS students. I appreciate the time to give you a quick update about what's happening in CRASC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And item 2.08 is the PTA report.
Good evening, board members. Good evening, Dr. Orlato. My name is Vanessa Rivera, and I'm with Anne Arundel County Council of PTAs. Just want to give you a quick update since the last time I was here. Over the summer, we conducted leadership training and financial training for our local units. We also had guest speakers on security and the new strategic plan. We've been very busy assisting local units with financial audits and assisting them maintaining their good standing status. Our goal currently for the year is to provide as much training to all the local units so they can take the information back to their schools and run successful PTA units. On October 15th, we're very excited to announce that we have an opportunity for PTAs to network with other units. We will also have a Q&A with the Supervisor for School Security, Dola Batten, and with Superintendent Dr. Orlato. So thank you for being there and providing parents with the Q&A. And this will give parents an opportunity to have a one-on-one with members of the Anne Arundel community of public schools. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we'll move on to public comment. Anyone wishing to speak on an item not on today's agenda may offer testimony during this public comment portion of the meeting. Speakers are allotted 3 minutes each and may not allocate their time to others. A tone will sound when time has expired. The board asks that comments remain civil and appropriate for the various audiences that may be watching or viewing this meeting. Student-specific and personnel matters are confidential and cannot be discussed in this forum. It is not the board's general practice to engage in question and answer session with speakers. For the record, please give your name before speaking, and handouts should be given to the board assistant. Okay, first, Josh Mazer, Melissa Ellis, Mary Dodone, and Aaron Snell. Yes, go right ahead.
Well, in keeping with the light mood that everyone is in tonight, I'm going to keep it light. I want to announce some good news. Dr. Howard Haft, who is the Deputy Director of Maryland Department of Health, has credited me personally with changing Maryland state school policy with regard to the HPV shot. As we know from my visits to the board before, the State Department of Health has issued secret letters to every school superintendent in the state pushing the shot. And the good news is that if you compare the 2018 letter to the 2017 letter, there are a lot of changes, and the changes include removing the word critical in sentence 1. We no longer have a critical crisis of under-vaccination against HPV in the state of Maryland. That's gone. And it's no longer imperative for kids to get the shot. That's gone too. And the reason for that is because of me. I read the package insert, and I reported to the board, I reported to the state board, and that stuff is gone. What hasn't changed is the prevalence of HPV and HPV cancers in the state of Maryland. What has changed is that the Maryland State Department of Health has been caught red-handed, engaged in what I consider to be deliberately deceptive and morally questionable behavior. The Department of Health is attempting to co-opt our schools to earn sales bonuses for pushing the HPV shot. The more they sell, the more money they get. And of course, they have to avoid the inconvenient fact that Christina Tarsal of Sparks, Maryland, her death has been attributed to the HPV shot, and that decision in the United States Court of Federal Claims was announced in September 2017. I want to share this with you all. This is the Annapolis Capitol from about 3 weeks ago. And over here on the right, above the break, on the opinion section, you have Dr. Howard Haft defending the program. What he says is that there are targets for sales of this shot in the state of Maryland. That's a very curious statement. Dr. Haft defends taking $92 million over 5 years to push this shot in our states. The more they sell, the more money they get. He does not mention the death of Christina Tarsal in this op-ed. On the same page, on the same day, you have Emily Tarsal, Christina's mom, giving her version of what happened to her kid. And in the time I have left, I just want to quote Emily. Let's see here. Thus, a claim was filed in the vaccine court for the Gardasil-induced death of my beloved 23-year-old daughter, Christina Tarsal. The court rigorously assessed whether the evidence presented satisfied the rules of law in the vaccine court. The evidence included testimony and reports by experts, reams of studies and medical records. The court determined that we had met our burden of proof according to the law, and she was entitled to compensation. I implore this board to speak with the Department of Health and the state board and get the pharma marketing out of our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazer.
Good evening. Melissa Ellis of Millersville, Maryland. On April, actually, let me start with this. The Center for Disease Control has indicated no safe lead level in children has been identified. On April 5th, 2017, Anne Arundel County Board of Education put out this letter indicating we oppose House Bill 270 as it would still have the effect of reducing or circumscribing local board authority and creates an unfunded mandate. Additionally, this bill would require the involvement of state agencies in matters and responsibilities that currently fall under the jurisdiction of local school systems. The Anne Arundel County Public Schools Division of Facilities is responsible for the construction, maintenance, and operation of all public facilities in a safe and efficient manner in support of the educational goals of AACPS. AACPS operates public school facilities in a manner conducive to the educational process by ensuring the health, safety, comfort, and welfare of the occupants. Local school systems devote substantial staff time and resources to provide healthy school environments, which include the water quality and addressing any issues associated with water quality. After this letter was issued, the bill passed, and AECPS requested and received an extension on this mandate. However, Prince George's County Public Schools, a district that has 85 more schools than AECPS, was able to complete their testing by the deadline indicated in the mandate. To your point that this bill reduced local authority, if it was in the best interest of our students, isn't that more important than your control? In light of the number of water outlets in 19 of our schools that measured lead levels higher than the EPA recommended limit, and AACPS only began its testing because of the mandate, how does this demonstrate that AACPS operates public school facilities in a manner conducive to the educational process by ensuring the health, safety, comfort, and welfare of the occupants? I believe the public, particularly students and their parents, should hear from the board how this position was made in the best interest of the students of Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and I urge you to please speed up the process completing the testing in the remaining schools and treat this as a health emergency affecting our kids and the staff in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Mary Didoni. I am with the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. In addition to being secretary of our branch, I am co-chair of the Education Committee. I'm here tonight at the express direction of our president, Reverend Steve Tillett, who regrets that he cannot be here himself. I, too, wish to speak on behalf of our branch of the NAACP about the lead in the water in our schools. First, let me frame our concerns. While we're glad that the ACPS has sent out a letter to families of children who attend schools where the water has not yet been tested for lead, letting them know that students may bring water bottles from home, we do raise the question if we have no idea of whether or not the water from home is any better than the leaded water from the drinking fountains. We don't regard this as a complete solution. We're not even sure that it improves the situation. We are also glad that AACPS is sharing the water testing data in a transparent manner. I believe we all depend on this. That said, we are very concerned about the health of the children and the teachers and staff in our school systems. As we assume you know, and as we just heard, there is no safe lead level in the blood of children. Even low levels of lead in blood have been shown to affect IQ, ability to pay attention, and academic achievement. The effects of lead exposure cannot be corrected. It is safe to assume, given that we already have positive results, that once tested, many more of the water outlets in the schools that have not been tested are going to come back as positive. In short, children are now being exposed to lead, as are teachers and staff. Now I want to raise some questions. Beyond allowing the children to bring water bottles to school, what is Anne Arundel County Public School doing to protect teachers and students from exposure to lead? I know from personal conversation that teachers are bringing water at their own expense and giving it to children. How many students and teachers are drinking from water outlets that haven't been tested but that could test positive? With the transparency of the data, we can keep track of that probability, but we'd have to build in assumptions that there was an equal probability of lead in the water at all the schools, and that's not true. The older schools are more dangerous. And is the water that cafeteria staff are using for cooking safe? Therefore, let me state the position of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP with respect to actions we would like to see this body to take. We believe the safest thing to do would be to assume that outlets contain lead until proven otherwise. We believe systems need to be in place now to make sure that all students and staff and teachers have safe water to drink at school and that school lunches are made with safe water. To do this, we may all need to come up with creative, dynamic solutions working together with other entities and each other. We also want to see the testing timeline accelerated, especially in the oldest schools, and schools that serve the youngest students, those will have the longest exposure in the future until we correct the problem, those who are most vulnerable. There has to be some way to get things done faster. For example, hiring more water testing companies is one example. We look forward to engaging with this body and finding solutions to the problem of lead in the school water.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Good evening, Board and Dr. Arlotto. My name is Erin Snell, and I'm speaking tonight as the president of the Hillsmere Elementary School PTA. I also am speaking about lead tonight. I wasn't planning on speaking about this tonight, but I really feel compelled after our PTA meeting last night. We had a completely full media center of parents and a gym full of students, and our parents are very concerned about the lead. And I'm also hearing appreciation about transparency of data, about the letter, informing parents, and I've also heard that there are efforts to try to speed up the process. But what I'm concerned about is in the interim. We are concerned. We already know that there are students drinking the water at our school. One parent came to me today saying, I just learned my 5-year-old, she has her water bottle at school, but at gym time, she's drinking out of the fountains. And how many students? I have a 7-year-old, or sorry, now 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And my student is in 3rd grade, and he's been drinking water at Hillsmere for 4 years, and out of the same 2 water fountains. And so what if that water fountain, one of those water fountains, is in the 7% of water outlets that is tested positive or elevated lead levels? Basically, the purpose of the PTA is to advocate for all children. And so at Hillsmere, we are trying to advocate for the kids at our school as well as fundraise to get clean water. And so we are budgeting and trying to find clean water for our school. But we know we're a very privileged PTA. And so we're concerned not only about our students who don't have access to BPA-free water bottles, and we're trying to find donors, but is that the role? Is that what we should be having to do? And what about the schools that don't have a PTA that is able to raise the funds that we are able to raise? My ask tonight is to the board in terms of creative solutions. There have to be some other ways to bring in partners or to find funding, emergency funding, to have safe water for our students. Because I agree with what the NAACP representative said, that until we know it is safe, I don't feel comfortable having my children or any staff drinking this water, and especially thinking of the cafeterias where I know when water is cooked and water evaporates, that intensifies the amount of lead, or at least from my understanding, could intensify lead, the presence of lead. So I'm wondering what is being done in the interim to make sure our kids are not getting exposed at dangerous levels. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Snell. India Oaks, Roberto Garza, and Dana Schallheim.
Good evening. I am India Oaks, the parent. Good evening. I am India Oaks, the parent of a now 3rd grader at Hillsmere Elementary School. I know the budget is later on the agenda, but I wanted to first just thank the superintendent for including the Hillsmere feasibility study this year. The main reason I am here tonight, and I will keep this short, is about the water safety testing. I know there is a lot of concern about what schools will be tested in what order, but the bottom line is that all of our students, at schools not tested yet, are in potential danger, and so until that testing is resolved, I am asking for the administration to consider turning off the water fountains, and ask the county to provide money to supply clean water for the cafeterias at all the schools that have not been tested yet. We have seen too often the health effects of lead in consumable water, especially for populations with limited health care, and so every day, every month, can make a difference if our kids, teachers, and school staff, including staff who are pregnant, are exposed to high levels of lead. So please, put in additional protections until the testing is complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oaks.
Good evening. My name is Roberto Garza, and I have 3 children, 2 of which attend Hillsmere Elementary. I'm also a proud graduate of the International Parent and Community Leadership Academy. Thank you so much for supporting that. I learned a lot, and especially speaking with Dr. Arlotto. One of the things, and I'm here to speak about the lead issue, one of the things, as I was thinking of my comments, is one of the things I learned from IPCLA was how the county and your staff and the schools, you have experts, right? You have experts that come together to provide excellent education to children and resolve issues with families. And being that I work in public health, albeit not in lead, it's a rich environment, a target environment for us and to come together and think. So I guess what I'm saying is I would love to learn more about how the county and you as the Board of Education are coming together and thinking outside of your current sort of stakeholders, because obviously as you think about lead and the process that you're engaged in to resolve this mandate, you can easily think of other stakeholders such as the public health officials at the county and higher levels. I can think of, this is obviously a complex process, so perhaps process management could be interesting. So it would be great to know more about how, as you, given the urgency that we're all, collectively take this issue, I hope that you are continuously reassessing your processes so that you can find efficiencies to accelerate, right? To accelerate the plan, to complete the testing, and then address the issues that you find. So how are you involving other individuals to critically assess the process so that, through the Six Sigma approaches, perhaps, business level approaches, you can identify efficiencies, reconsider what you're doing, and find solutions and accelerate. So I'd love to learn more about that and challenge you to think more broadly. You certainly have universities and other institutions and experts across the field who can help you critically review that. Secondly, public health education is a subfield of public health, and it's certainly a rich field that includes behavioral health. It takes into account literacy levels. The idea is to identify and understand your community so that you can educate them so they can make better, healthier choices, right? So I commend Dr. Arlotto for the great information that he provided to families, and this open and transparent information is fantastic. I also see the opportunity here to bring in the public health folks so that you can provide health education information to families on healthy water, how to identify the effects, the importance of getting more blood screening so that you can identify the children that perhaps have been affected, get them the help they need, and help families to continue to make healthy choices. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Garza.
Hi there, good evening, Dana Schallheim. I'm a parent of a second grader. She goes to Folger, and I'm also speaking tonight regarding the lead water situation. Specifically, I'm concerned about the 5 schools tested last spring whose test results are still pending. It's an awful long time to wait for results, and I'm just wondering if we can't encourage the lab to move a little quicker in processing those results. Now we're months and months and months since they were taken, and I don't believe the turnaround time is that long, based on my conversation with Martel directly and trying to understand their turnaround time. I also noticed that only 5 schools in Region 4, which is the first region, have been tested so far. We're in week 4 of school. And at that rate, are we going to hit the deadline by the end of the year? I'm wondering, and I'm also wondering if we can move that along quicker. It's my understanding that there is a water testing lab in Anne Arundel County. I'm not sure why that wasn't tapped to do this work in addition to Martel and Towson, and perhaps utilizing them would help. And also, just as a parent, I'm not letting my daughter drink the water from the school until it's proven safe. I'm also encouraging other parents at the school to do the same. I know that Folger was recently renoed, but it's my understanding that it wasn't totally replumbed, and when that happens, there's still a risk, and I'm not going to play roulette with my child, nor would I recommend any other parent do the same. It would be great. I love the website. I like the regions. I like, it provides a lot of really great information. I appreciated the letter, but to piggyback on the others who've spoke tonight, I think that we really need to provide safe water for all the students in the schools that have not yet been tested. Why would you want to risk opening yourself up to litigation or endangering children if they happen to be especially fond of a water fixture that happens to test positive for lead later? So just some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schalheim. Mr. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Dr. Arlotto, to date, has water testing shown that we have any entire water systems in a school building that are tainted with lead?
No.
So we're looking at one fixture, two fixtures in a building?
Correct. So we have someone earlier in their testimony, and I've heard this before, that it's being reported that 7% of the outlets are testing high for lead. The data, and it's clearly on our website, is that just slightly over I think it's 1.05% have shown high levels of lead. So it's a very, very small percentage of the consumable water outlets are showing higher than expected or higher than should be, over 20 parts per billion, as dictated by law. So there is still we have a concern as a school system.
Any percent is too much.
Right, absolutely, and we totally agree. But it is not showing that it's, to answer your question in a few more words than you probably wanted, it's not showing any widespread. It is single outlets or faucets at sinks in particular areas around buildings. If it were the pipes, and I am not an expert, and so I say that very, very clearly, but as I've tried to get up to speed with these issues, we are not seeing it in, for instance, down an entire corridor of a school building or a wing of a school building, because if all of those outlets were coming up high for lead, that would probably say it's somewhere in the pipes, in the ground, or in the walls or floors. And so it's showing us that it looks to be individual outlets. I don't know that for sure. I'm not an expert, but that's what the folks are telling us. So it is not widespread. It is very limited to one or two or three outlets in a particular school. We just got the results back and posted, for instance, I believe, at Lyndale and Brooklyn Park Middle, and those are fairly big and older buildings, and they came up with 0, as an example. That doesn't make anybody feel better when a building does have one or two or three outlets that might be, but those have been turned off. And so we are concerned as well. We are certainly in a fight. Well, I'm sorry, you may have other questions. I've got some other comments. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
So with regards to speed of testing,
yes.
Have you had the opportunity to speak with other districts about how they were able to complete so quickly?
We have. So I have spoken to one superintendent, and then our COO, Mr. Sheknovich, have talked to his counterparts in some other school systems to see how they've gotten through the process. In particular, I know he's talked to both Prince George's County and Montgomery County. Can we learn from bigger systems that have gotten through this process? So we've learned some things. In the case of Montgomery County, for instance, they started the process earlier than we did. They were more comfortable in starting than we were before the regulations came out. Remember that this legislation was passed in April. It became law in April of 2017. The regulations did not come out that tells us how to do the work, did not come out for a year later. We started just at the end of March because we had somebody on the committee, we believed we knew what the regulations were. We didn't want to have to go back and repeat. And so we believed at the time we knew enough, and so we started in March. But a place like Montgomery County, twice our size, 206 schools, if I'm not mistaken, they got started earlier, and they were able to complete their schools.
I mean, you mentioned Montgomery County and the success they had, but what about Prince George's?
I didn't talk directly with Prince George's County, so I don't have that. I don't have the data on them, but I know that they went through the process and were able to complete. I believe they've published results, but I did not speak directly with their superintendent, but I did speak with the superintendent in Montgomery County.
Okay.
And so we are testing every outlet, not just the consumable outlets, whereas other districts are just testing their consumable outlets. Is that correct?
Correct. We began the process because we didn't know what the regulations were going to state. We went ahead to try and get ahead of the game to test all of the outlets. So that could be not only a drinking fountain and a sink in the kitchen, but also a hose bib in the back of the building, for instance. And so we've been testing all of those. Now that we have the regulations in hand, and through this process starting with this September, we are going to go to just the consumable outlets so that we can get through the buildings quicker and we can try and speed up the process. So we're going to go to the consumable outlets and not worry about those, say, exterior hose bibs.
Have we looked into seeing if we can speed up the testing?
Yes, ma'am. So we've talked to our lab that we've hired. Let me make sure that everybody understands really clearly. If my research is accurate, and somebody might correct me if I'm wrong, there are 4 labs in the state of Maryland that are certified to do this work.
For every school district?
And I pause for you, the board, to understand that clearly. 4 labs that have been certified to do this work for this legislation, which means all the labs right now are overwhelmed because all the school systems are trying to get through this process of not only testing, but now those, say, like a Montgomery County that has shut off a water fountain and replaced it, they can't turn it back on until it gets retested. And they haven't been able to get to that because the labs are all doing this work. They are, our conversations with our lab, it's been mentioned, Martell Lab, they've been trying to work with us. We've asked them if they can speed up the process. It's limited by the number of technicians they have to collect the water samples. They have to be trained to collect the water samples because there has to be a chain of custody, a well spelled out documented chain of custody of the water samples. And then once the water samples are taken, then they need to have the right lab techs to conduct those tests. It was mentioned earlier in testimony that we have some schools that were tested in April and May, we don't have the results back. And the answer is that's correct. Those results are at Martell, and they're going to get to them as soon as they can get to them. We have asked them if they could speed up the process. They've told us they're in the process of hiring and training more lab technicians, more collection technicians. They are looking to hire and train more lab techs. And in fact, for our contract, they've agreed to go out and buy another vehicle so they can get more teams on the road to help us get through this process more quickly.
And we have started by second week of school. We had started, and they're
right,
back out there.
We did not test the first week of school. The second week of school, we started the process again. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So thank you. We will now move on to the public hearing. This is a public hearing on the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2020 CIP and capital budget. Those individuals wishing to testify have signed the sheet that I have before me. As the board wants to hear from everyone who has taken the time to be here tonight, 3 minutes will be allotted to each speaker. If you are here with a group wanting to speak on the same subject, I ask that you appoint a spokesperson to deliver testimony. Other members of the group are welcome to stand while testimony is given. The light in front of me will flash yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and a tone will be heard when your time is up. For the record, please give your name, the spelling of your name, and the group you represent. Copies of comments are welcome and may be given to the board assistant. I will call individuals in groups of 5. Please come up front and have a seat at the witness tables. You may speak from the podium or from the tables wherever you are more comfortable. This hearing is designed so that the board can obtain public input on the budget recommendation as opposed to a back and forth discussion. Board members will take what they hear tonight as well as other input received prior to this hearing and formulate their thoughts and questions about the budget, which will come up for adoption later in the meeting. Okay. And I have 2 people signed up for tonight, Kristen Itzel and Julie Stetter.
Good evening, Dr. Arlato, President Hummer, and members of the board. My name is Kristen Etzel, E-T-Z-E-L. I live in the Old Mill neighborhood, and I'm the organizer of the Fund Old Mill School Construction Group. To start, I would like to thank Dr. Arlato for including the initial phase of design funding for 3 of the schools in the Old Mill Complex Master Plan in his proposed fiscal year 2020 budget. This includes Quarterfield Elementary, Rippling Woods Elementary, and the new Old Mill West High School. Thank you. I'm probably a familiar face to many members of the board based on my previous appearances. However, since we have some new members of the board, I'll give a quick background. I've been advocating for funding for the Old Mill schools for 2 years, which began after spending time in the open classroom setting of Rippling Woods and learning that Old Mill High School also has walls that do not go to the ceiling. I've recently reached out to the Board of Ed candidates and current members, as well as the County Council candidates, to provide background and history of this issue and to ask for support for these projects. I'm pleased with the positive feedback I've received. Old Mill schools were considered in the top priority category in the independent 2006 MGT study, but every year we've seen our funding slated for the coming years in the budget projection, but each year we've been pushed off again. Not this year. It's an exciting first step for us to see funding in the superintendent's proposed budget for this current fiscal year. It's Old Mill's turn. When you consider the proposed budget before you, we ask that you vote to keep the funding for Old Mill schools in the fiscal year 2020 budget that will be presented to the state and to the county executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Etzel.
Hello, Dr. Arlato, President Hummer, and members of the board. My name is Julie Stetter, and my children attend Rippling Woods Elementary School. I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but we appreciate the blue that you're wearing tonight. Thank you. I also have previously attended board meetings. I've spoken to the county council about safety concerns at Rippling Woods. Recently, my kids came home from religion class and told me how their friends who attend Richard Henry Lee are in a different school because of school construction. My son asked, when will it be our turn for a new school? When I saw the proposed 2020 budget, I was psyched to tell him it's finally our turn. So I'm here to say thank you for including the initial phase of design funds for some of the Old Mill schools. Thank you from my children, thank you for me, from my neighbors, and from future Old Mill students who will benefit from new and safe schools. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the FY 2020 CIP and capital budget? Okay. All right. We will now move on to consent items, awards of contract. Do I have a motion to bundle items 5.01 through 5.03? Okay. Ms. Connolly, would you call the roll?
Mr. Gilliland?
Aye.
Mrs. Nally? Aye. Mr. Reinhardt?
Aye.
Mr. Butcher?
Aye.
Mr. Grannon? Ms. Korblack?
Aye.
Ms. Urea?
Aye.
Mrs. Hummer?
Aye.
That's 8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend the Board of Education award the contracts as listed on today's agenda, 5.01, 5.02, and 5.03.
Okay. All right. Are there any board questions or comments? Mr. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam President. With regards to the salt contract, was this pricing taking into consideration any leftover salt that we have in our stocks?
For the record, Alex Nova, Chief Operating Officer. So yeah, we do have a significant amount of salt in stock. This is the anticipated additional purchasing requirement if we have a typical snow year. So we do not go out and automatically buy $150,000 worth of salt. So we've got stocks or piles that we eat off of. We utilize those, and then we re-rotate old product out and bring new product in on an as-needed basis on a per-storm basis. And you know the utilization rate is directly linked to either the quality or the quantity or duration of the storm. So we're pretty adept at monitoring how quickly we're going through the inventory that we have. We also have a partnership with the county that we share with the county, either our salt products with them or their salt products with us for spot shortages in different parts of the county to tide either them and or us over while we're awaiting new product deliveries. So we've got a pretty robust snow removal and salt replenishment process that we've worked out over the years.
Are there any other board questions? Is there any public comment? All right. Then, Ms. Connolly, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Gilliland. Aye. Mrs. Nally. Aye. Mr. Reinhardt.
Aye.
Mr. Butcher.
Aye.
Mr. Grannon. Aye. Mrs. Korbalak.
Aye.
Ms. Urea.
Aye.
Mrs. Hummer.
Aye.
That's 8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
All right. Item 6.01 is administrative personnel appointments, and there are no appointments tonight. Item 6.02 is ratification of the negotiated agreement between the Board of Education and the Teachers Association of Anne Arundel County for fiscal year 2019. Dr. Arlotto, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend board approval of the tentative agreement between the Teachers Association of Anne Arundel County.
Ms. Rawls.
Yes, good evening. My name is Melissa Rawls, and I am the Director of Employee Relations. The fiscal authorities for Anne Arundel County did not provide sufficient funds in the FY 2019 budget to fully fund the negotiated agreement between the Board of Education and the Teachers Association of Anne Arundel County. Accordingly, pursuant to provisions of the Education Article and the TAC negotiated agreement, the parties entered into renegotiations and successfully reached a tentative agreement subject to your approval this evening. The summary of changes as agreed upon by both parties include the following: that all Unit 1 employees will receive a 2.1941% COLA, which will be effective July 1, 2018, and that a mid-year step will be granted to eligible Unit 1 employees. The negotiating teams diligently worked to reach an agreement that best served the interest of all TAC members and recognizes their commitment to Anne Arundel County Public School students, staff, and community. I would like to thank Executive Director William Jones, former President Richard Benfer, and TAC, the negotiating team, for their ongoing partnership with the board during the FY19 negotiations period. On September 12, 2018, TAC approved this agreement, and I respectfully request your approval and ratification of the noted summary of changes. Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Good evening. I'm Bill Jones. I'm the Executive Director and the Chief Negotiator for the Teachers Association of Anne Arundel County. Like my friend Ms. Rawls, I'd like to acknowledge the effort and the persistence of Ms. Rawls and the board's team, but I also want to acknowledge the members of the TAC team. This is the second time that this agreement or portions of it have been in front of you. You voted for it in June and then had to break it because of the lack of funding. And I know it's got to be a little frustrating for you, and I know it is for TAC and its team. We go through the same exercise way too often, negotiating a contract in good faith, and find out when it gets to Calvert Street, the resources to fund it get axed. I do ask for your support and ratification of this agreement, the remainder of this agreement anyway. And I also ask that you keep hope with me that this might be the last fiscal year for a while we have to go through this same exercise.
Thank you. Ms. Korbalek.
For the benefits of our employees, approximately when would they see their retroactive 2%, 2.1?
Yes, we have an anticipated date that would be November 21st, 2018. So the retro payment would be included in that payroll notification for employees.
And then when is the mid-year step month?
It depends on when the mid-year point of your employment occurs. For 10-month employees, that will occur in February, in the beginning of February, and for 12-month employees, that will be in January.
Thank you, guys.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam President. 2.1941%. That's not exactly a nice, clean number. How was that arrived at?
TAC and the board, as Mr. Jones indicated, worked very hard, and the calculated amount is actually a result of an opportunity to provide the maximum amount that employees could receive, which was within the budgeted FY19 increase designated for Unit 1 employees.
Are there any other board questions or comments? Is there any public comment? All right. Ms. Colley, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Gilliland?
Aye.
Mrs. Nally? Mr. Reinhardt?
Aye.
Mr. Butcher?
Aye.
Mr. Grennan? Ms. Korblack?
Aye.
Ms. Urea?
Aye.
Mrs. Hummer?
Aye.
8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
Good job to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6.03 is the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2020 capital budget, 6-year plan, and state capital improvement plan. Dr. Arlotto, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend the Board of Education adopt the FY 2020 capital budget, 6-year plan, and state capital improvement plan.
So, and we do have a presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Please allow us to introduce herself. I'm Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer.
Lisa Seaman Crawford, Director of Facilities.
Michael McCafferty, a Supervisor of Maintenance.
And we're here to present item 6.03, which is an action item this evening to adopt the fiscal year 2020 capital budget, as well as the 6-year plan and the state capital improvement plan. As the board recalls, the state funding cycle is out of sync with the county funding cycle. In fact, we are required no later than October 4th of this year to remit our requests to the state so that they can begin their budgetary analysis and deliberations. And that is why this budget is before you tonight. It was first presented to this board on the 12th of September, and on the evening of the 13th, we had an extensive workshop. We certainly had opportunities to answer questions, that we've heard additional public testimony this evening. The budget that's before you has not changed. We're asking for the projects in the same order as was reviewed with you the evening of the workshop, and the same essential amounts from both the county agency and the state agency. With that, we'll rest our presentation and entertain any questions the board might have.
Mr. Gilliland.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank all of you. I'd like to thank all of you and Dr. Arlotto for what I thought was a very helpful workshop a few weeks back. So I appreciate your support answering a lot of those questions. Since then, I've had time to digest the numbers, and certainly I'm going to vote for this tonight. But I wanted to ask, if I may, just on line items 1 and 2. First, health and safety. In FY19, the request was $750 million, or I believe that was the actual amount that was funded. 750. I'm sorry, long day. 750,000. So sorry. People jumped at me for a second. 750,000. We've doubled that, at least in this request. Is some of that money to account for the need to pay for some of the water faucets, et cetera, that may be needing replacement due to the testing results?
It is. A portion of that is attributable to that factor.
And then for line item 2, security-related upgrades, last year there was a $1 million funding line, or I should say the current fiscal year was a $1 million funding line, and then total we're looking at $7.45 million, $950,000 request from the state, and then $6.5 million from the county. Can you explain the rationale behind both of those numbers, the county as well as the state?
Sure. So originally we asked for $1.5 million. We've traditionally asked for $1.5 million. In the initial budget that was adopted by the county council in the current year, the $1.5 million for security was modestly reduced to $1 million temporarily, and then the council, as you recall, over the summer took supplementary budgetary action to transfer $5 million additional dollars to the Board of Education. So cumulatively in the FY19 year, the year we sit here today, there is a total value of $6 million in security. In the year ahead, the request that's before you, it's really contained of three separate components, Mr. Gilliland. There is the original $1.5 million request, which is basically our standing request for like revolving security funds to cyclically replace equipment that's going out of date. For example, the hard drives for our camera systems that record and store the security items. After a certain number of years, they age out, they have to be replaced, et cetera. So there's that base $1.5 million funding level in there. We build upon that by taking up the second half of the supplemental insurance money that County Executive Shue announced over at Annapolis High School in the presence of many of you and your colleagues here on the board this evening. So there's $5 million. That's the second component of the 2-year $5 million announcement that the County Executive made. And then finally, the state of Maryland, through legislation that was adopted and completed this past April, signaled that there's basically going to be 2 years of security-related funding from the state. It's going to be handled as a grant. They've telegraphed to us what essentially is the maximum amount of the award to the county. And so we've added a $950,000 line item in the request that we have before the board for FY 2020. And then we also have embedded in the FY 21, and although you're voting on the 20 budget, we have the second half of the $950,000 also embedded in the 2021 budget. So when the second half of the grant comes through, we'll have sufficient appropriation authority to spend it. We also ensured that we had thoroughly analyzed the grants and have met all of the matching funding requirements. There will be no issue in terms of us being eligible for the awards once the state makes its way through that through their process on their end.
Thank you for that. And I just want to be clear because I think many of us were concerned that we weren't asking for enough when it came to security, school security matters, and I know the public has been asking for financial support there as well. But with regard to the $950,000, we are indeed asking for the maximum amount that we're allotted per the state grant.
Mr. Gilliland, you know me well enough to know that I'm not going to leave any money on the table. So we're going to take every opportunity possible to maximize the yield that we receive from the state to stretch our local dollars as much as possible.
Are there any other board? Mr. Reinhardt.
So looking at the 6-year plan, it really is an exciting time to be part of Anne Arundel County Public Schools. We're looking at numerous new high schools, new elementary school, looking at 2022 to get that started for Mountain Road. My question deals with our anticipated populations by the time these projects are done. So we have Crofton High, we have Old Mill, and then Old Mill West. By the time those projects are completed, do we anticipate that we will be meeting the number of seats that are required for our high school students?
Sure. So essentially we are a rapidly growing county, no doubt about that, and we've got the projections that basically show the students being layered in at the high school level each year. The Crofton High School will bring on an additional 1,700 seats, 1,696 if you want to be exact. The two Old Mill schools together will have a total of 3,400 seats. Today there's only 2,300, so there's a 900 seat increase there spread amongst those two schools. And then the anticipated West County High School will have a total gain of 1,700 seats as well, being ground up construction. You put those numbers together, and just in those three projects, those 4 projects alone, including the two Old Mills, Crofton, and the new West County High School, we're pushing 5,000 plus new seats that we're bringing online across that time. So, and then yet there's more high school work to come after that. So yeah, we're keeping an eye on the ball to try to put as much capacity online as possible, Mr. Reinhardt. I would caveat that though by saying pending availability of funds, because our plan is completely dependent upon the sufficiency of amount and sufficiency of pace of funding at both the state and county level to keep those projects on our planned, after your vote, your planned trajectory.
So those 5,000 seats, I'm looking, the West County wouldn't start proposed design until 2025. So let's say 2028, 29 to be generous. Do we anticipate are the enrollment projections greater than 5,000 seats by that year?
Well, there's also going to be opportunities to do redistricting too. So we have other seats in the county, so it's going to be not just straight ground up construction. So we're going to have a series of construction and redistricting and construction and redistricting to take advantage of the new opportunities that the new seats will afford. So it's going to be a multifaceted sort of project to make sure we keep on top of the growth.
So as we move into the Old Mill project, as we discussed at the budget workshop, once this project gets rolling, it must continue. We can't stop in the middle. They're all kind of contingent on each other as it goes along.
The only two schools that are not interlinked per se are the two elementary schools, that being Quarterfield and Rippling Woods. And what we are seeking to do is essentially to front load those two elementary schools. Obviously they're needed, they're open space, they're antiquated. Front load the two elementary schools and get them out of the way while we're finishing the permitting and design and getting the first of the Old Mill schools completed, and then that will allow us to focus on the secondary schools and Cat North at the same time.
Just looking forward, are we looking at, I know we have some prototype designs for our various schools. Are we looking at using basically the same design for the two Old Mill high schools?
The two Old Mill high, we anticipate, well, so let me back up by saying we're probably, not probably, certainly the leaders in the state in the use of prototype designs. We are by far, in terms of the use and the precedent-setting nature of this county, we have the highest percentage and have for a very long period of time. We fully intend on constructing both high schools, Old Mill West and East, as prototypes, and both middle schools, Old Mill Middle, North and South, as prototypes. And the two elementary schools, again, should the feasibility study depict them as being new schools, and again, considering the flight path and some other considerations, that's highly likely, both elementary schools will be prototypes. So the only project out of the Old Mill study that will not be a prototype will be our Cat North facility. However, we have already had extensive conversations with Montgomery County. They constructed the most recent ground up, very, very nice, and some staff have already toured, and we intend to learn a lot from their new facility that they just put up, and Dorchester County put up a technology center about 3 or 4 years ago. So we haven't put a technology center here in quite a long time. I think Cat North was mid-1975, I think, something of that nature. So we have a lot to learn. We're very good at the elementary schools. We've obviously, done middle schools, but I think we have a little bit of the benefit of Cat North being a little bit later in the sequencing, so we can get up to speed and do our homework on what the state-of-the-art of CAT programs are across the state of Maryland.
So, and does that save us significantly in design and cost when we're using the prototype from one to the other?
It does. It saves us on design. That's one piece. The other thing is saves us on time. We can design it quicker. We have less chance of having errors and omissions. It gets through permitting quicker because the second prototype that goes through to reviewing authorities look at it and say, oh, I've already seen this before. All the kinks in a way have been worked out of it from the regulatory code perspective. Certainly, because it's a prototype building ground up, that doesn't mean that the ground underneath or where the utilities come in, there are some things that need to be adjusted. But it does save time, it does save money, both on the design side, and then once we've built the first one and got the kinks knocked out of that one, certainly we'll save on change orders and unforeseen conditions, things like that, on the second iteration of each prototype.
Mr. Reinhardt.
So with the prototype design, do we anticipate getting several designs to consider? Again, I'm beating the drum on projections, seat projections. Would we be able to see small, medium, and large, for example, for the schools, that we could perhaps have larger buildings?
It's TBD when we get to that point, but certainly we do. Most of our buildings, we contemplate expansion of them, so we pre-position some assets. The central plant, we run some bulk mains for water supply, for sewage return, things like that. So we anticipate the eventuality that some buildings may need to get expanded. We also anticipate the eventuality that the building may possibly need portable, relocatable classrooms, and we pre-position assets in our buildings to support the potential eventuality of them having portables there as well. So those are the factors that Ms. Seaman Crawford and her team routinely take into account in every one of the designs they do.
So during the workshop, Mr. Gilliland touched on the ability for us to bulk purchase construction materials. You know, if we're building the same high school twice or 3 times, would we be able to buy and store at a lower price for our materials?
No, because you're going to be building the schools about 3 to 4 years apart, so storing an entire high school's worth of materials for 4 years, where you're going to put it, there's a chance that it could, degrade or something like that. So when you're, for example, if we're building the 2 elementary prototypes and are in the same time, in the same phase, bulk purchasing makes a lot more sense. The state of Maryland, when they passed the 21st Century School Facilities bill, or the NOC Commission's recommendations, it actually gave LEAs a new tool to encourage things like bulk purchasing, consolidating projects, et cetera. So we have, effective July 1 of 18, LEAs have more tools in the proverbial toolbox than we previously did to start leveraging additional economies of scale and things like that. And we absolutely intend to employ those to the best of our abilities on all of these projects.
So we'd be able to partner with, say, Baltimore County if they're working on Lansdowne High at the same time?
If it was the same kind of project and if it was beneficial to both parties.
Are there any other board questions or comments? Is there any public comment? All right. Ms. Connolly, would you call the roll?
Aye.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Aye.
Mr. Butcher.
Aye.
Mr. Brannon. Ms. Korbelak.
Aye.
Ms. Urea.
Aye.
Mrs. Hummer.
Aye.
8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
Thank you all for all your hard work on this. Oh, y'all are still here.
Yep.
Sorry, forgot. Y'all stay for the next one. Item 6.04 is the fiscal year 2019 comprehensive maintenance plan. Dr. Arlotto, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend board approval of the fiscal year 2019 comprehensive maintenance plan.
Okay. All right. Are there any board questions or comments on the comprehensive maintenance plan? Mr. Reinhardt.
I'm going to be that guy today, aren't I? Yes. All right. So looking over our year 2020 plan, I see that North County High School has a $5 million investment in new chillers and other HVAC equipment. But it's my understanding that we invested quite a bit of money in North County last year with some issues with HVAC. Could you speak to that?
Sure. So North County High School, Mr. Reinhardt, is built in phases. As you know, it wasn't all constructed and put in, and all the equipment wasn't put in at one single time there. So like many of those buildings that are phased or go across time, the equipment has an expected life expectancy, and we try to match the reinvestment or the replacement of that equipment with the coterminous with the expiration of that equipment's expiration date. If we replace it sooner than that, we basically lose value. So, for example, if we bought a 20-year chiller, I'm just making up an example to keep things simple, but if it was still good working order, why replace it in year 17? We would be leaving 3 years of value of that unit on the table. So with the limited resources we have, we do try to right time, right place. Now, obviously, again, in my hypothetical example, if you have a 20-year machine, it could suffer premature failure. It could have a lightning strike that knocks it out. So sometimes we do have to do things sooner than we would have hoped, but to the extent possible, we try to go with a programmed or planned approach to equipment replacement.
So was that money spent at North County last year? Were we planning to spend that money, or was that emergency repair?
Last year was an emergency repair.
Would you agree that that could have been prevented with additional maintenance staff looking after that equipment more frequently?
I think that was all related to a extreme cold weather condition, largely. which isn't predictable. I mean, we're sitting right now in the middle of the rainiest year we're probably going to go down as the rainiest year we've ever had in the state of Maryland. So that was more of a weather-related function than a lack of attention to the equipment issue.
Were any other large sums of emergency dollars spent in the county that could have been preventable?
No, typically, again, most equipment really does have, nowadays, equipment's made rather well, and if the equipment has a scheduled amount of run hours or life cycle on it, most equipment does tend to make that. So absent a weather kind of condition, a power surge condition, something like that, we typically don't have what we term as premature failures.
So then you would consider that our current staffing levels for preventative maintenance staff, that's appropriate?
No, I do not consider that at all.
So what would improving the staffing for preventative maintenance do to chip away at this maintenance backlog?
It could do two things. One, it could potentially extend the life of equipment. So going back to my hypothetical example, if you treat equipment, if you treat it well, and it's designed to last 20, you may get 22 or 23. You get more value for your initial investment. If you treat it poorly, there's a potential you can have a premature failure. So doing preventive maintenance will ensure that it at least gets to its expected life and possibly gets more expected life out of it. That's one piece. The second piece really has to do with energy efficiencies. So to the extent that it's properly lubricated, properly balanced, et cetera, it's operating at a more efficient level, and therefore you're using less utility consumption within that unit. If you're not doing that, the unit's still running, it's still cooling, but it's running less efficiently, and therefore the expense you're paying is you're paying more utility costs because you've invested less human capital into that unit.
So if I'm understanding correctly, then adding preventative maintenance staff, actually, we as a district see a greater dollar benefit than just the cost of that staff member.
Correct. You can gain quite a lot by doing preventive maintenance properly and sequenced in the right fashion and the right intervals.
So just for the public, where does the funding for the maintenance plan come from?
So there's two pieces of it. The personnel that attend to maintenance in the county comes in our operating budget. The actual physical assets are largely co-funded by both the county, and on items of buildings that are eligible for state participation, we try to receive state funding for those items too. For items that are eligible for state participation at the component replacement level, we typically yield maybe 45% or so from the state. The county has to do the other 55%. For items that are ineligible for state participation, it's 100% local county capital costs and a 0% state capital costs.
So would you agree that if the county were to invest in additional maintenance staff, that the capital expenditures for this equipment would, in the long run, be reduced?
Essentially, it's putting a down payment today to get a better return in the future. To that extent, I'll agree.
Okay. Well, hopefully the county council's listening.
Mr. Gilliland.
Thank you, Madam President. I was upset at Colin for pushing the button, and then I pushed mine. So I'll buy a dozen donuts tomorrow. So my question, actually, Mr. Reinhardt's questions, or a series of questions, made me think of this. The reports that earlier this week we were reading about University of Maryland College Park with the excessive rain, more or less what's turned out to be a mold outbreak. And you had referenced the excessive rain that we've received. To the extent possible, and I know you can never be 100% sure, but just so, whether it's a staffing related issue or just any other way that we can be preemptive, preventive, a lot of PRs there, which could lead to a PR disaster, but it's one of those days. Are we getting ahead, or at least trying to proactively check, buildings that may have had leaks in the past, that with the excessive rain that we're not going to be caught in the spring with with mold spores.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think a lot of it, so the answer to that is yes. I mean, buildings are checked each and every day. When we believe we have exposures, Ms. Crawford and Mr. McCaffrey and Mr. Andrews from our operations unit, we go out and do weekend checks. We'll check buildings on holidays before we open up to school the next day. So we're very proactive in that regard. I mean, every building system basically has a design capacity. I don't care if it's heating, I don't care if it's cooling, or I don't care if it's dehumidification. So when the climatic conditions exceed the design capacities, the pre-contemplated design capacities for the building, you always have the chance to stress the system out. So we know basically to what level, to what capacity our buildings are designed. They're not all designed together. We have older buildings, newer buildings, as you can well imagine. And so, we know, depending on the exterior conditions, be they temperature, dew point, humidity, et cetera, we know which buildings we need to attend to more in terms of visual checks and more aggressive monitoring, et cetera.
One thing I noticed in the plan that stood out to me was the great work by your Energy Conservation Office, that they've received $1 million in utility incentives and rebates, which is fabulous, and that because of upgrades and improvement in lighting and the HVAC systems, we're saving $350,000 a year. That's great. Hats off to your teams for that great savings that we have there. So according to this, we have a $343 million backlog in maintenance that we have, and we have the 5-year plan. You're asking for 179 a year or something. So last year, our request for the maintenance backlog was underfunded by the county by about $9 million. Is that correct? Did I read that correctly?
Sounds about correct.
So each year that we're underfunded on that, all of this backlog gets pushed back more. So if it's funded at the rate we want it to be that we're asking for the next 5 years, then we're going to keep up and reduce this maintenance backlog. But every year that it's underfunded, everything gets pushed back more and more. So that $9 million a year, that's significant. Of more things that we're delaying and trying to stretch for another year or things like that.
Sure, and it's not exactly as linear as you had it. So our maintenance backlog last year was $326 million. This year, as you can see, it's $342 million. So a portion of that is attributable to the deferred maintenance, the maintenance that was anticipated to be completed but wasn't because of funding. So a portion of it was moved forward. That accounts for $9 million. But each and every year, more items reach that scheduled life cycle, end of life cycle kind of event. So you've got the new items that are on the list plus the carryover from the last year. That's the second piece. And then in times like now, where we've got pricing inflation, 3.74% or so in the consumer market right now, the cost of the individual items per item go up as well. So we have to keep track of deferred maintenance, newly scheduled maintenance items coming on track, and then we have to cost escalate or cost inflate the replacement value of those items. So. And that Mr. McCaffrey and his staff keep track of all of those costs for us.
So, as Mr. Reinhardt said, additional preventative maintenance staff would be a down payment for savings in the future, and receiving appropriate funding from the county to meet these goals saves us in the future too, because as you said, costs go up. So the sooner we can do things, if we do it the price today, it's going to be less expensive than the price in 2 years.
Right, and the state is very mindful of that as well. The state will not participate in funding of the replacement of ill-maintained equipment. So if we have a project and we put in, and Mr. Reinhardt began to go down this road, if we put in for a project, all capital projects are line item appropriated. I mean, the state looks at our justification level. They look at the age of the equipment. On occasion, they'll send inspectors out to look at our assets before they'll decide whether to fund them or not. If they are of the belief that we did not properly maintain it, that the equipment failed for reasons that were not, for example, a BG&E voltage spike that's an act of God and none of us could have essentially prevented, it could put us also in a potential for the state not participating in it. So we are very diligent in maintaining the equipment because, again, 15, 20, X years down the road, we don't want to jeopardize the potential of that equipment being co-funded by the state to the extent that it is an eligible item.
Mr. Grannon.
This is a very helpful presentation. Thank you. I just have a quick question. When the capital improvement budget comes through and there's a new school construction or a refurbishment or something like that, does that not lead to a corresponding substantial decrease in the maintenance backlog?
Absolutely. We carry that the liability for the preventive maintenance activities in that building. We carry that liability in the comprehensive maintenance plan. Once the project's brought online, then all of the deferred maintenance for that project gets backed out. So the comprehensive replacement or reconstruction, et cetera, of a school does help make inroads because it essentially eradicates the deferred liability of that older pre-existing building.
Okay, so the logical conclusion then is obviously, a $300+ million backlog is not something we want, but it's not inescapable that it's just going to keep getting bigger every year because we have several new major projects coming on that will at least help offset some of that.
Absolutely. Every single newly renovated, reconstructed, replaced building, et cetera, dollar for dollar, all of that, again, the deferred liability comes off the ledger when that project is delivered.
Thank you.
Are there any other board questions or comments? Is there any public comment? Okay. Ms. Connolly, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Gilliland? Aye. Mrs. Nally? Aye. Mr. Reinhardt? Aye. Mr. Butcher? Aye. Mr. Grannon? Aye. Ms. Korbelak?
Aye.
Ms. Urea?
Aye.
Mrs. Hummer?
Aye.
8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
Thank you all again. All right, item 6.05 is Glen Burnie Park Elementary School Forest Conservation Declaration. Dr. Arlotto, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend board approval of the Forest Conservation Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions at Glen Burnie Park Elementary School.
Are there any board questions or comments on this item? Is there any? I see your finger waiting there. Mr. Gilliland, your finger's there. Do you want to? No? Okay. Is there any public comment? All right. Ms. Connolly, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Gilliland?
Aye.
Mrs. Nally? Mr. Reinhardt? Aye. Mr. Butcher?
Aye.
Mr. Grannon? Aye. Ms. Korbelak?
Aye.
Ms. Urea?
Aye.
Ms. Hummer?
Aye.
8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. All right. Item 6.06 is an information item. As a result of new law, the composition of the Board of Education will change beginning December 3rd, 2018. The board will now move towards being comprised of 7 nonpartisan elected members, 1 member from each of the 7 councilmanic districts in Anne Arundel County, and 1 student member. The first 4 elected board members will take office on December 3rd, 2018, and the remaining 3 elected members will take office on December 7th, 2020. In light of these changes, the board will engage in discussion on 2 policies for possible revision in the future. Policies BBD and BF. And Mr. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam President. As chair of the Board Policy Committee, we're having this discussion to remain in compliance with the Maryland Open Meetings Act, since we are discussing potential changes and concerns of policy. So we're having this discussion tonight because in our Policy Committee meeting, which is also open to the public, public's welcome to attend those. That calendar is published online. We began to have a challenge in figuring out when the best time would be for officer elections, considering we have what's going to be a mixed board of appointed and elected, and that folks have been brought on at different times, whether it makes more sense to have elections immediately after a board is seated, or if it makes more sense to match it up with our school calendar, to start it on, say, July 1st. So we're having this discussion in public about what would be the pros and cons for those two situations.
Ms. Korbelak.
I would just say that our board has always elected our officers immediately upon seating in July. We always have turnover in July. And if the turnover is now going to occur in December, certainly by December of 2020, we'll have the cycle, in place. I think at some point there needs to be a transition year where you're electing your officers in July, say like July of 2019, next July, but those people serve for 18 months to get us to December of 2020, when you'll be on this new cycle of elected board members. Or you could do it the same thing, July of 2020, you elect your officers for 18 months, and by December of 2021, your new board has been here for a year, they know the deal, they can decide if they want to serve as officers. I don't think it, I don't have a preference either way, I won't be here, but I think we should align the officer elections with the seating of the board.
Mr. Grannon.
I agree with the substance of what Ms. Korbelak was saying, but just another alternative then would be obviously to have an election early in 2019, and that would be a new board seated, and I'm not saying that's necessarily better than what Ms. Korbelak was suggesting, but in particular, given the policy behind the legislature's change in how board members are selected, there might be a little thumb on the scale in favor of doing that, because if you don't do it that way, you're basically having the election of officers by an entirely unelected board govern a board that is at least half elected. So I'm just throwing that out there. And then obviously the incumbent officers, to the extent that they're still on the board, could run for re-election, and that would be up to the full board to decide, which would be a mixture of both newly elected as well as kind of grandfathered in people like myself.
Ms. Nally.
I agree with Mrs. Korbelak and Mr. Grannon that those should be considered. I think it's important, as a former, I've been president and vice president, and when you serve on the board, I think a lot of people don't realize how much it takes to be a board officer. When I first came on the board in 2007, it took me a full year to really learn everything I needed to know. I didn't want to be a board officer. I wanted to learn and I wanted to know. And I think that whether they're elected, appointed, or whatever, when a board member comes in, they aren't immediately ready to be a board officer. They really do need that time. So I think it's important, however the policy is written, that bear in mind that we need to I think, do that and have everyone have their opportunity to speak. But just bear in mind that board officers, it takes a lot of training to be an effective board officer.
Mr. Reinhardt.
So I hear two sets of concerns, and it's from what I've heard so far, it seems that we're leaning towards changing elections to after the seating of new members. I see, just we're going to play devil's advocate here. So we have two situations that could arise. When we have a completely elected board, there's the potential that every single person is new, and we will have to elect leadership among all those folks who are potentially unaware of the processes behind the scenes here at AACPS. So I was thinking, okay, so we'll start in July, but if we have that election in July before the general election, and they get ousted, then we're back in the same situation. Just as I was considering, well, perhaps because of how we set the budget and our capital improvements, and we set our goals for the superintendent, all of that happens early on in the school year, and perhaps it makes more sense to have leadership seated in July so they can see the whole year through. Well, then we run into that issue again. Well, general election comes, the folks get ousted. So how would the board feel about creating a sunset situation so that we look at two chunks for our two differently seated or elected boards? So we have, we keep it in July until we are fully elected, at which time it transitions to after the board is seated after the general election.
Ms. Corbelette.
That's what I was suggesting by having an 18-month president and vice president, because your fully elected board is December of 2020. So December of 2020 is when you should have December elections. Because we've already elected our officers for a July to July term, going through July of 2019. We didn't change our policy in advance, so they stay till July of 2019. So July of 2019 is the first time we could actually put a new policy into effect.
So Mr. Grannon suggested that perhaps after this election that we have another vote. So we can't change the policy at this time. Our officers are our officers for the next 12 months. Is that correct?
So based on the current policy, if you leave the policy as is, then your officers are your officers. I mean, ultimately, if you decide to revise your policy in some way, and I'm sorry, Jeanette Ortiz, Legislative and Policy Counsel for the record. So if when you update your policy, once you revise it, then you would follow through. You indicated a sunset provision, or we could do a delayed effective date is another way of looking at it, in that even if you updated the policy now, it wouldn't take into effect until whatever date, the board decides on the voting of the officers.
Mr. Grannon.
Yeah, I guess the more I think about this, especially since we're no matter what going to end up in a system where the elections take place after the board members are seated. That's what's that's inevitable. The more I think about that, the more I think about the aura or the impression that's going to be given to the new board members as well as to the public if we try to hold that at bay as long as possible. That seems like really frighteningly undemocratic in the face of what the legislature is doing, to say, well, we're going to hold off on that because we think that people who have been in office longer know better, and so we're going to make their tenures stickier. I think even after hearing this, I even more strongly feel that we should make the case that the elections should occur right after this December, and then the people who have these positions can make their case to the new board, which will be half elected or almost half elected, and then whoever else is sticking around, and they can make the arguments as to why their experience on the job in that particular position is what's best for the board, and then the full board can vote on that. But to say, well, we know better, and we're going to hold this inevitable change. It's happening. We're going to hold that at bay, and then it doesn't matter to me who these people are. But obviously, the two officers that we have now are both candidates for the board, and should they not win their elections, we're saying, well, no, we still want these people to be officers of the board, even though they didn't win their elections. That's entirely undemocratic. So I don't know if you're planning to do this by consensus or not, but I would not support that. And in that event, I would like to vote on that.
We're actually not voting on anything tonight. This is just a discussion, and then it will be sent back to the policy committee to be drafted. So there's no vote tonight. This is just an open, transparent discussion before the public about different options. Mr. Reinhardt.
So To your point, Mr. Grannon, you'd mentioned in earlier comments that we should give the incumbents an opportunity to make their case, as well as the new board members. I believe that could occur in January or in July. They would both have that same, and the 6 months would give folks an experience. I certainly hear your concerns, and with going back to the policy committee, there will be opportunities for public comment, just as with all of our other policies, as we enjoy a discussion about sunscreen use in just a few minutes. So there will be an opportunity to hear from the public and also to cast a vote and share on that. But but if I understand correct, Ms. Korbelak, so we would, the second, so you were proposing 18 months rather than a 12-month and a 6-month. What's the rationale for 18 versus a potential 6 month?
I was trying to get us to December of 2020 because I thought it was too late to change our officers for the year. So I thought the election from July of 2018 was going to carry us to 2019, July of 2019, no matter what. And so we could have an election in July of 2019 for 6 months, but there isn't another election until December of 2020. So the new folks from December of 2018 will have been there 6 months, and they can certainly run for officers or elect the ones that they prefer. But then the next crop of new folks doesn't show up till December of 2020.
Okay. And for clarity, Mr. Gillen and Ms. Hummer, if you were to lose the election, would you still be members of the board?
Yes, we would.
Through the appointed seat?
Through 2020, yes.
And Mr. Gillen as well?
Yes. Yes. He would still be on the board until 2020.
Okay, so there still would be continuity in leadership across that next 12. Okay.
Right. So, Mr. Grant.
Yeah, I think a very important point that Ms. Korbelak was making is you had thought that, but then Ms. Ortiz disabused you of that. So that's a very sort of important, not so subtle point that we should get across, is it very easily could be changed in this policy by this board to make the election, for example, in January, in which case we would just then have annual elections in January, right after the members are seated each December. So we would be completely on cycle. We'd have we wouldn't have to go to some 18-month officership to make it even longer. We would have an election in January, and then we would have another in January 2019, and we'd have another election in January of 2020. Then whoever comes on in December of 2020 is eligible to run in the next annual election of January 2021. So we'd be totally on cycle.
Well, the elections would actually have to be held in December because members are seated in December. So if a whole new board is elected and is seated December 1, you have to elect officers immediately. You can't wait until January.
Well, that's under the existing policy. We could change that policy. It doesn't matter.
Well, there has to be someone presiding over the meeting. So that would have to take place. Mr. Butcher.
Brandon, I'm almost there with you. What I'm trying to make sure I understand is it only if an individual is elected as opposed to appointed that you're suggesting that they should have an ability to dictate who the leadership is?
No, my suggestion was that whatever the constitution of the board is at that time, those people should be making the determination. And the best way to do that would be to have and whether it's in January or at the end of December, whatever it is. I don't know that I accede to what President Hummer was saying, that it has to be then. But in any event, as soon as practicable after the seating of the members gives the opportunity to that board to make that decision. And all I was saying was, if the experience in the officer position is the most persuasive thing to the full board members, then they'll vote on that basis.
So we have a vacancy right now currently. Let's just say that this is filled within the next couple of days for whatever reason. So we would have a new board member. Does that mean that we would then have to, under your suggestion, why not? You would have a new person that would then have to say, well, I didn't agree to the membership before. I should have an opportunity to weigh in on it. I could probably do the job better.
Because an ad hoc resignation or incapacitation of a board member that leads to a replacement is one person. What we're talking about is setting forward basically the constitution for how this board is going to elect its officers. And we're debating back and forth between proposals, and it was made abundantly clear through Mr. Reinhardt's questioning and I think accurate description that no matter what, we are going to get to a position where this board elects its leadership immediately after the board is seated. The only question is how soon we're going to get there. And what I was suggesting is it seems a little undemocratic to say, well, we know that's going to happen. That's going to be the way that this board elects its officers in 2038 and in 2058. But we want to hold that at bay a little bit longer so that our officers who have been in office longer, we think they know better, and we want to make their positions as sticky as possible. And I think in the face of what the legislature obviously is determined about making boards elected, that us rubbing against that is not the right thing to do.
Is there any, final question, is there any consideration on the fact that that's still in the middle of the school year? Is that any consideration? Whether it's December or January, it's still the middle of the school year. Is there any consideration to that at all, as opposed to having continuous leadership during the entire school year?
For me personally, as I'm talking about this, no, because I certainly think if we're saying that the election of the president of the board is going to be something that's going to be harmful to students in the middle of the school year to have that kind of change. I kind of hope that the students in our school.
Well, you're suggesting that the presumption is that it's harmful to students,
No,
but I didn't say that. I just asked. I think there's other duties based off of the president and vice president in terms of what they're doing throughout the year.
Let me make it abundantly clear: is nothing I'm saying was meant to imply that, to be frank, whoever the president of this board is, that's going to be harmful to students. I certainly don't think that's the case from the current officers or any officers that I can imagine. What I'm saying is it's undemocratic for us as a public institution to say, we know it's coming, that we're going to have the election of officers immediately after the board members are seated. We're going to try to hold that off as soon as possible. That's what I'm talking about, process and policy. I have no fear whatsoever that whatever decision we make on this, any students are going to be harmed.
Okay, you brought the harm part up. That's why I didn't understand that. So okay.
Well, maybe I misinterpreted your question. To whatever, when you were saying that there might be, then what were you saying when you're talking about middle of the school year? What difference does that make?
Well, we've already started. That was the question. Was there any consideration at all in terms of any of these various policies of that these elections, everything that's taking place, whether it's December or January, it's going to be in the middle of the school year? That's the only, it's just an observation.
Not a consideration for me.
That's it.
Ms. Corbelak.
I was just going to say, we can't guarantee the continuity of the president and vice president in election years because, as Mr. Reinhardt pointed out, the whole board could be wiped out in an election year, which is also why I would say December had to be the election instead of January by policy, because at some point there could be no one here in December who was already an officer from the previous year.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Ms. Urea, I'd like to apologize for an oversight. In fact, the student member would bridge. So we, as a fully, as a member with full voting rights on this board, yes, you could be. Perhaps that would solve our problem, Mr. Grannon. Is the student member could oversee for a few weeks until we get the new leadership. Yeah, go on the resume. So perhaps then we can come to a compromise. It seems that we are in agreement that we're going to go to, or that we're going to, in policy committee, we're going to propose for this board to vote on, that we will go to elections for officers of the board immediately upon seating, when we're fully elected. So I think we're in agreement on that. Mr. Gillen, you good? Yeah, all right. And so we're really limited now to the next set of months. Mr. Grannon suggests that we can start in January 19 or December 18, and we hear other members suggesting, well, let's do a longer stretch, or at least keep this leadership in place. And I'm not sure it's to make the position sticky as much it is just to offer continuity. I can see potentially that if we were to change leadership, whoever was in that leadership position, that they have the right to change the direction of the board. And if we've set our course for the school year, it is possible in the middle of the school year with new officers that we could change that course. And whether it's down to contracts or budgeting or whatnot. So, but that's going to be a problem once we're fully elected. So, what I'm offering then is perhaps a compromise, and we, rather than this next having another set of officer elections in December of 18, that we begin in December of 19. There was the expectation when this board voted that the officers would be in place for 12 months. We all voted with that understanding. Ms. Ortiz has since disabused us. That's a fun word. Has since disabused us of that. It's not fun. but how do we feel as a board, as mixed, appointed and elected, to start those elections then in December of 19?
Then
so we'd have a 12-month term with current officers, then a 6-month term, and then a 12-month term, 12 months after that. So we'd have a 12 and then a 6, and then we would begin the regular election process as far as we into the future we can see.
Mr. Granite.
I just, for the accuracy of the record, I want to make sure it's abundantly clear. Saying when I said January, I don't want there to be any semantics about this. I mean as soon as possible after the selection of these members, and I guess I want to reiterate, especially we're talking about different permutations here now with officers who are up for election, who are going to be, I guess, potentially even voting on this, and just the appearance of that. We could defer this decision. That's another thing we could do, is we could defer this decision until after the new board is fully seated in December. That to me, that would at least be a more respectful way to acknowledge the process that the legislature has put in place.
Yes.
Let me clarify. So
I'm still speaking.
Well, I want to address what you're saying because I think it will answer some of what you're saying. So the way the timing on this would work, we're having this discussion now. It would go to the policy committee to be drafted. It would come before Ms. Ortiz, make sure that I'm saying this correctly. It would come before this board, for the existing seated board, for first reading, and then go out to the public for public comment. Second and third reading, because of the timing, would fall under the newly elected board. So that way, this board has input into it, but the final vote and input and opportunities to amend, if they so wish, will go under the new board. So it would be voted on by the old board. This would not be the new board pushing something on with no input from the newly elected board.
Well, I disagree with that entirely, and I don't think what you just said was at all an appropriate clarification of the point that I was making. We would absolutely be setting in motion, but there's no reason not to do this in December after the new board is seated. Why set this in motion? Why make it that much harder for them to change something? There's no reason that this board has to do that. The new board can make this decision in December.
Mr. Reinhardt. Oh, sorry, Ms. Ortiz.
So that is correct. So it would not be difficult for the new board to amend whatever this current board pushed forward as a proposed revisions to the policy, because they would have the opportunity to make any amendments on second and third reading. So it would go to the new board, which would be comprised of at least some new members, on second and third reading, and you have the ability to amend a policy on second and third reading. So that would not be, that wouldn't be any different than the way we're doing it now.
Mr. Granite.
It would be entirely different to set in place something that a new board, it's then incumbent upon them to change something that's already in motion. There's no reason that this has to be done now. What is the pressing need that this has to be done at the end of September, set in motion now, that we have to do this when this decision could be made in December by a new board with people? It's like we're like reacting to this, that somehow elected board members are like an evil to be delayed as long as possible. The legislature put this in place. The people voted for the legislature. The people will be voting for these board members. It is absolutely undemocratic for us to put any impediment in their way for them to have a full influence on this. So there's no reason to have a first reading now. Let's defer this until December, and then then that board can make the determination. And in particular, when we're dealing with a situation where officers are now potentially voting on their own continuity in officership when they're not even members of the board anymore, and financially benefit from having the officer positions, I think it just reeks of the idea that we want to do something to keep the elected board at bay, and it's not necessary.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam President. If we're talking about timeline, the longer we push off this discussion, then the longer there is for the potential of a new board voting to hold, if they wish, immediate elections. So we're having this discussion now to give that option to the new board as soon as they deem appropriate to have that election. So if we push off for the first reading or even another discussion like this until December, then we're looking at March at the earliest?
Yes, because the policy, so if you wait until the new board is seated, and so for the first December meeting, not even the first December meeting, because it would have to go to the December Policy Committee, which is in about mid-December. So then let's say that policy committee, determines how they would like to revise this policy. The policy would not come before the full board with the proposed revisions until the second meeting in January, or the first meeting in January. It depends on how the calendar runs, but sometime in January. So then it would come before the full board in January. It would go on a 30-day public comment period, would take us into February, and then depending on where that falls on the calendar, it would be on second reading either in February or March. So we're not looking any earlier than March before then the new policy would be enacted.
So it is with respect to that timeline and the new board that we are having this discussion now to give the new board the option as early as possible to hold elections if they wish. We're trying to respect, with our proposal and with our timeline, the new board, including those elected members. So the insinuation that we are trying to hold off elected members from leadership, at no time will this board that is currently seated before you have a vote on this policy. We will never have a vote on this policy. I will never have a vote.
Thank you, Madam President. I've been silent on this because, to me, we'll figure it out when we get there. But, Mr. Grannon, I resent the implication that I'm sitting in this chair to financially benefit, because I am not. I get the exact same salary of $6,000 to do this that you get. And I know you're losing a boatload of money by serving on this board. I'm losing a boatload of money by serving on this board. And to sit here and say that I'm doing this because I have some sort of financial benefit is, to me, insulting. So with all due respect, I resent that, sir.
Mr. Grannon.
Okay. Well, with all due respect, I think I've known you for 8 years, and if that's the way you took that, then I don't think you know me very well at all. What I said was the impression that it gives the public to have people who are in officer positions voting on something that could affect their continuity in that position raises an aura of impropriety. It has nothing to do.
Mr. Grannon, we're not taking any vote.
Hold on. Now, the process point that you made, if what you're saying is correct, in terms of giving the new board an opportunity to vote on that, that's fine. I have no problem with that in terms of starting this now. But what you said was baking into the first reading of that policy this idea of a compromise that the next election would be in July of 2019. I do have a problem with that. If we're so eager to give the new board an opportunity to influence this as soon as possible, let's not blow on those dice. So I'm talking about the substance of what you're saying, not the process. If we're doing this to give the new board, immediate influence from the get-go, then don't bake into it this idea that the election should be in July of 2019, because that rubs against that.
Mr. Butcher.
I just wanted to clarify because I didn't think we were taking any vote. I also don't think that we need to have the type of tension for this. We're just trying to get it right. So I don't think it's really that big of a deal for us to start talking about people being undemocratic and all that other stuff. So let's just kind of keep everything above board.
Yes. I do want to bring in, I think, something that needs to be added to this policy, because there's currently nothing. The current policy states that if the president or vice president are temporarily unavailable to quit their above responsibilities, but there's nothing in there that says that talks about how, for instance, if a board officer resigns, there's no mechanism in there for how board officers would be replaced, and I think that needs to be added. I think the policy committee needs to look at that language and see what that would be if somebody resigns or, and steps away, how we would do elections at that point to fill an officer position.
So are we looking at, if the president were to resign, would we not have succession from vice president, or we would have to then vote for president and keep the vice president?
Well, there's nothing in the policy that says what we would do. It says if the president is not available, that the vice president steps in, but there's nothing to say that if a position becomes vacant. What if the vice president resigns? There's not an immediate person to fill their spot. So I think we need to add to the policy to have some sort of mechanism to fill possible vacancies at some point for how they would handle those things. So, Ms. Corbelak.
Ms. Ortiz, is there anything in the current law that said our officers have to be elected in July? Like, do we also need to go to the General Assembly to change that too?
No. Some school systems actually have that in state law. We do not. So we have discretion in determining that.
Mr. Grannon.
I think if we're going to be doing that, another thing that we can do, and it sounds like the policy committee is the right place to do this, is let's also examine the powers of the officers, especially as we're going to a fully elected board, and if there are concerns about people having those positions who perhaps don't have the same experience as the people who have them now. And inevitably it's going to be the case that you could easily have a president and vice president who've had zero experience on the board. In particular, because of that, and because of the things that go along with having an elected board as opposed to an appointed board. For example, things like the president of the board being able to basically set the agenda for the public meetings if he or she so chooses, without input from the other board members. That's something we should consider. This board put in place, over my objection and over my vote, something which seems really kind of silly and petty and arbitrary, that the president determines where people sit up on the dais. And at the time, I said, well, guys, we're going toward an elected system. Let's have people sit in order of seniority or alphabetically or something like that. And this board went, I think it was 8-1 against me, and said, no, the president should determine where people sit. And so stuff like that, we should really think about that kind of stuff as we're going toward an elected board.
Mr. Butcher.
Are you saying that this current board did that vote?
Yes. If you weren't here, then it was the board that existed right before you joined them. But that happened this year.
That is in the board handbook. It was revision of the board handbook, and it does say that the board president, with consultation from board members, sets the seating for the board members.
With consultation.
Are we really talking about where people sit? Is that what? Look, you talked about perception. We've spent more time talking about something that we're not even going to vote on that has absolutely nothing to do with the kids. We've spent more time. We haven't even engaged with the people that are mentioning comments about lead in the water, but we're talking about
where people sick and policy that we have nothing to do with? I'm asking that we just move on from this. This is really a waste of time. We're already sending stuff back for the policy committee to address. Let's keep it moving. This is kind of pathetic, actually.
Mr. Grannon.
You know, Mr. Butcher, it was your election to comment or not about water safety issues. If you chose not to comment on it, that's your choice. What I'm talking about, this is a public body. It's a public function. And just for example, the Supreme Court of the United States has rules about where people sit. So what I'm talking about is not silly. And the idea that a single person could decide to move people around for some personal reason or a political one is a very serious thing that this board should take into account.
I take your point. We're just pretty much just like the Supreme Court. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay. All right. We will move on. Mr. Reinhardt, we'll bring that before the policy committee, which, as we said, is open to the public to attend, and we'll draft that, and that could come to us in the future.
There's certainly a lot to consider, and our next policy meeting will be Wednesday, October 17th at 1 p.m. here at Reba.
So, item 6.07 is first reading for student sunscreen use, policy JM. This is an information item. Ms. Ortiz.
Again, for the record, Jeanette Ortiz, Legislative and Policy Counsel, and with me,
Sally Egan, Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services.
So the Division of Student Support Services is bringing policy JM, student use of sunscreen, before you for first reading. This is a new policy. The policy is in accordance with new Maryland state law, which requires local school boards to adopt a policy on student use of sunscreen at school and school-sponsored activities. So in accordance with this new state law, this new policy authorizes students to possess and use sunscreen at school and school-sponsored activities without written permission from a healthcare provider. The policy will be posted on our website for 30 days for public comment, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Are there any board questions or comments about this policy? Mr. Reinhardt.
Got to keep the streak alive, Madam President. All right. So, is there any consideration in this policy of the various delivery methods of sunscreen available today?
So, no, not specifically, because the state law is very broad in authorizing students to bring sunscreen. So whether it's lotion or an aerosol spray, that was not limited in the state law, so therefore we really can't limit that. However, there is language in the policy under the position C2, which states that a school principal shall implement the appropriate procedures to ensure that the sunscreen is for personal use, self-applied, and that application of the sunscreen does not negatively impact other students. So, you might have students with allergy or asthma, something like that, where an aerosol could be harmful or negatively impact them. So the principal would make a determination as to, whether something like an aerosol spray would be sprayed outside the classroom. But we couldn't limit what type of sunscreen the students can use.
And children of all ages in our care are able to bring and apply their own sunscreen?
Yes, again, the state law is very broad on that point with regards to, students in our school and school property, and it's to be self-applied.
And that includes pre-K?
Technically, yes, that would include pre-K.
Okay. So another sunscreen product has recently come to my attention. There's some recent regulations here in Maryland that allow sale of CBD-infused products, so cannabis. There are CBD-infused sunscreens. What's the district's current policy on CBD in our school buildings?
So we don't have a policy on CBD in our school buildings, as maybe folks may or may not be aware that medical cannabis is legal in the state of Maryland, and so therefore there are various ways in which folks can take or medical cannabis, so it could be done via a sunscreen or an oil, an ointment. So yes, that is possible. However, the law does define what sunscreen means, and so that is also sorry. Yes, it's also, I'm sorry, it's a C4. I've defined exactly what the law states sunscreen to be. So if a CBD sunscreen fell under this definition, then I think it could potentially be allowed, but I would really have to look into that further.
So we don't have a broader overall policy with regards to CBD?
No.
Okay.
Are there any other board questions or comments? Is there any public comment?
I did want to add, though, that in the definition of sunscreen, it has to be approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration for over-the-counter use. So I'm not sure that a CBD sunscreen would fall under that definition. So in that regard, then it would not be allowed.
Ms. Schulheim.
Hi, Dana Schulheim. As a cancer survivor, I just want to point out that CBD does not have hallucinogenic properties, and it's legal nationwide. So just so we're not like going there, you know, it's not, you're not gonna, there's no hallucinogenic properties with CBD oil, and it's legal nationwide.
It's not reefer madness.
It's not reefer madness, no.
Okay. All right. Ms. Uria.
I just have a question. With your knowledge, does tanning oil fall under sunscreen? Because what would prevent students from, by accidentally bringing tanning oil instead of sunscreens and then actually harming themselves more?
So the definition says that it's used to prevent the effects of overexposure to the sun and not for medical treatment of an injury or illness, and then also has to be approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration. So I think tanning oil or tanning lotion would be the opposite of that, and so therefore wouldn't fall under that definition.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Item 7.01 is a review item, award of contracts. Are there any board questions or comments on this item? Okay. We will move on. Item 7.02 is a review item, update on transportation.
So please allow us the courtesy of introducing ourselves before we begin. I'm Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer.
Les Douglas, Transportation Supervisor.
Bob Mosier, Chief Communications Officer.
And thank you for the opportunity to present this follow-up to our April 18 presentation before this board, as well as our July 10 Summer Series information sharing session, and as well as to address some of the issues we've come across with the initial implementation of the transportation routing software. At the outset, I want to remind everyone what Mr. Douglas, seated to my left, has said in two previous presentations before this board, and reiterated again in the summer session, in that the routing software in and of itself is not a push once button and you are done commodity. It is clearly part of a long and complex iterative process that we are in the early stages of fully implementing. But it is a process that will, in the end, make us better and more efficient when it comes to transporting the now more than nearly 62,000 students whose needs we try to strive to meet each and every day. There are a few additional points I'd like to make at the outset and briefly touch upon in order to provide some further context to tonight's discussions prior to turning the floor over to Mr. Douglas. First, as a rapidly growing school district, AECPS is picking up far more students, driving more lane miles, supporting more dispersed instructional programming, and servicing more remote locations, even as far away as Timonium, north of Baltimore in Baltimore County, on a daily basis than ever before. Also, with the rapidly growing pace of growth and development that we see all around us, we are all seeing far more traffic congestion across larger parts of the county with only limited visible capital efforts to expand roadway capacity, widen bridges, or add more travel lanes. And finally, as the Director of Transportation for Montgomery County Public Schools conveyed to this board when he addressed us on his presentation in 2015, the workshop about their experiences with respect to schools starting later. The later start times have, as he had predicted, in fact, pushed more of our buses into the more heavily trafficked and congested periods of the day, thus resulted in longer travel times as well. And again, that's what he foreshadowed for us back in 2015 when he, as well as the Deputy Superintendent from Fairfax, came and gave us some information. With that as a background and context, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Douglas at this time.
From the Transportation Division's perspective, the issues we've seen this September are generally of the same scope and nature as in previous years. We have, however, had more call volume, ranging from a few hundred more calls a day in the first few days of school to a few dozen now. The routing program implementation has been somewhat bumpier than we would have liked, but I must reiterate that we have said all along that there would be some disruption to routes and timing as we made this transition. Some pickup times generated by the new computer routing system were obviously overly optimistic, and that caused these disruptions. Our published stop lists come with a disclaimer that listed times are estimates, and we continue to refine those estimates several times a day. Except for the timing issue, the rollout of the new routing program went essentially as planned. We met all of our timelines and avoided major issues commonly associated with failed implementations, such as buses not being able to achieve all of the work they were assigned, or inadvertently publishing sensitive routing information causing FERPA violations. We have had issues with some late buses due largely to ongoing driver shortages, but not related to the rollout of the new routing system. The driver shortages, though nowhere near as acute as they were in the 2017-18 school year, are still an issue. As we move forward, we'll continue to refine the system. Protocols for producing computer-generated times will be refined to reflect more accurate stop times for route buses using current GPS data generated by the county-owned school bus fleet, as well as feedback from driver timing reports. We'll also further refine bus stop descriptions to assist all parents, but particularly those new to our school system. And with that, I'll turn the microphone to Mr. Mosier.
So as the transportation personnel continue their work, we continue to refine and enhance the way we're notifying parents and students and the public. So our office takes information from transportation. We use our automated notification system to call, text, email parents. When possible, we give letters to students. That happened today at Chesapeake High School, for example, with 2 bus routes that we did there. The changes are also posted daily, several times daily, as Mr. Douglas said, on the website. We also put the letters that we hand students onto the school websites. Bus drivers are also instructed to convey changes directly to students, which has happened all along, but we've augmented with the process that I've just said to you. And again, that's a process we'll continue to refine and enhance as we move forward. And with that, we'll take any questions you have.
Mr. Douglas, So
Yes.
you said at the beginning, so did we have higher volume of complaints about bus things the first couple of weeks of school, or about the same of what we have other years?
No, normal volume is about 800 calls a day for the first several days. It's extremely high. This year we estimate that was about 20% or 25% more. Emails are hard to determine since many are not from parents. I mean, I tried to pull the email volume, and you really couldn't get either questions from parents or complaints, only because the email volume, we're doing business on the email. So if we could capture a total email number, we still couldn't really glean how many were complaints. The phone calls, and again, these are estimates, but in the first couple of days of school, we generally have about 800 calls, which, if you allow me, one of the things this program will eventually take care of is that 800 people won't have to call us. So even though we had this bump, which we expected because of having to tweak the times, when this is fully running, what we would like to happen is fewer people have to call us. They can get the information through other ways. But generally, we have 800 calls a day. And this year, we estimate that to be 1,000 calls for the first couple of days. We're down in the second and third week to a much smaller phone volume. So the issues that had to do with the timing of the bus routes settled down within a matter of a couple of days. I hope that answers that question.
Mr. Butcher.
Yes, in terms of some of the delays that you were talking about with like
Right.
late buses, what is like the longest delay in terms of during these last couple weeks?
We didn't, with the exception of maybe one or two exceptions, or a very small number of exceptions, there weren't delays associated with the routing times. The delays that we get the first couple of days are usually, and they're really in two different areas. One is just buses that are late for one reason or another. But you also have in the first several days a situation where every driver is going a little slow. They're taking a little more time at each stop. Their parents asking questions at the door. So we discount morning delays the first 2 or 3 days of school, only because most of them have to do with people just being overly careful. But I think your question is addressed to failure of a bus to show up on time. Is that?
However you want to
Yeah.
define it.
Okay.
What is the longest delay that you've seen thus far?
An hour.
An hour.
Yeah, which is not acceptable.
And when you had that type of a situation, what is the response? I mean, for purposes of addressing that to the parents, to the kids, what was the response?
Well, so you're talking about not how do we respond with the contractor, but how we communicate to the parents.
Correct.
For years, it hasn't been good, and what we're trying to do now is a greater flow of information from the contractors to our office, and then information from our office to the communications office, so that we can implement a much more effective communication that, hey, your bus is going to be late, or we know the bus is going to be late.
So in the situation that you had for purposes of an hour delay,
Right.
how long did it take for you to realize, to get that information that there was an hour delay?
The better part of the hour, which is one of the problems that, as a department, we're experiencing with contractors, and that needs to improve.
And my final question, once you realized that,
Yes.
did that continue day after day? I mean,
There were a couple, not the hour delay, but there are some delays, and generally that happens in the afternoon, and it happens sometimes, and it various reasons why it happens. Let me give you the one that we have no control over. First week of school, many principals will keep the buses in the lot for an inordinate amount of time for a very good reason, which is we want to make sure every student is on the correct bus before we let the buses go. So during the first week of school, sometimes into the second week, you have buses that are late to subsequent schools because of the fact that folks in the afternoon have been very, very careful that kids get on the right bus. So that's one situation. Another situation is just that the timing has not been estimated correctly, and the bus is getting to the next school late. We try to identify those as soon as possible, and through a process of triage, and we try to take care of the most serious ones first. So if we know that a bus, because of scheduling reasons, is arriving at a subsequent school late, let's say half an hour late, and there's another bus that's arriving 15 minutes late, we use a triage process that says the half an hour late's more serious than the 15 minutes. So we try to correct the more serious problems first through this first 2 or 3 weeks of school.
There is a third condition, Mr. Butcher, and that's the one that deals with the driver shortage at some contractors. So if the contractor does not have a sufficient number of drivers to cover all the routes, they do what they call is a double run. So they will complete one entire full circle, come back to the school, pick up the second contingent of children, and deliver them. Clearly, that is outside of the bounds of the contract, but that's what they've done given the circumstances that they were faced with. What we do is two things. One, obviously, we have a mechanism that liquidated damages are assigned to the contractor. That doesn't help the situation. What does help the situation is we reach out to the contractor, obviously express our concern regarding that. We encourage them to contact other contractors that may have spare bus drivers that they can temporarily hire to service them. That's a commonality. We determine from them if they are fully utilizing all of their staff. So, for example, sometimes the owner, the other office employees, other employees of that bus contracting firm are in fact CDL drivers. We want to make sure that they have all the folks that they could possibly have out on the road behind the wheel. And the third thing we ascertain, because folks are continuously getting certified and certificated by the state agency and then by the county to be bus drivers, we confirm with them, so where are you? How many people do you have in the pipeline? When do you expect them to come out, et cetera? So that third condition also exists, and I sort of explain how we try to remedy those to the extent that we can.
Mr. Reinhardt.
So we heard in testimony in the last meeting that there is an app or apps available to help with communication and tracking of the buses. Have we had an opportunity as a district to look at that?
So I did take, I have taken some time over the last 2 weeks to do some very preliminary exploration about the apps that are out there. There was one in particular that was mentioned in front of this board several weeks ago, and so I went with that one as sort of a common place to start. There are two pieces to that puzzle. The first is for the app to work, each of the vehicles, the buses in this case, have to be equipped with GPS. And so it was mentioned that another county has this app, and the parents are able to monitor the comings and goings of the buses and the timing. That is a school system that owns all of their buses and therefore has installed GPS systems on all of their buses. We own about 50 buses in our fleet. We do have GPS systems on the buses that we own, but as you well know, this board knows, the majority of our buses are not owned by us, they're owned by contractors. Some of those contractors do have GPS, most do not. So it needs the GPS system installed on the bus first. The second piece is, once the GPS is installed, then you buy this product that allows you to communicate through the GPS with this app. The app certainly, as it was reported, doesn't cost the parent anything, but the school system does. So it is a per vehicle charge. And so an average cost that I was able to work out with one of these is about $33 per vehicle that's out on the road. And so if we've got 400 buses out on the road, that's over $13,000 per month to maintain that connection between the GPS on the bus and the signal that this app is connected to.
And we've got about 700 buses per day out on the road. Contractors are north of 600, and we're 55, so the number will be a little bit higher than the superintendent alluded to.
May I also speak to that issue? And I think I said this in the first presentation. This routing program that we've purchased and that we have now implemented, and the GIS system that it sits on, is a first generation of technology that you need before you start putting these apps on top of it. So you're talking about layering layer B, layer C on this basic technology. So really, in addition to the cost and the GPS that needs to be on each bus, we really need to get this firmly in place before we start putting some of those other apps on the system.
Mr. Gilliland.
Thank you, Madam President. If I could just piggyback on Mr. Reinhardt's question about the GPS, do we know, and I certainly understand 700 buses, but do we know if that capability exists for the special education buses? Mr. Shaknovich, you mentioned I know we have a route that goes up to Timonium, for instance. Do parents have that ability by using an app for special education students?
If it is on one of the 55 like lift assist buses that we operate, we do have GPS on those. Again, we do not have the app procured. We have special ed buses that are not run by our publicly owned buses, however, and to the extent that they do or don't have GPS, that would be dependent on our contractors. We only have two. We've got over 10 contractors, only 2 of them, to our knowledge, use GPS on the bulk of their vehicles. The other contractors don't utilize that technology at all. So it would be dependent on, are we servicing the vehicle or is the contractor? And if a contractor is, you've got less than a 20% chance that that contracted vehicle would have that technology on it.
May I also add, in the current contract that went out today for buses we're bidding on for next year, we didn't put language in that says they must have GPS, but we did put language in that said we may ask for this on any of these buses, and that we would control the GPS. So that didn't have a financial impact on the bid or on the contracts, but it did open the door if in the future we wanted to put GPS on that we controlled, that we could. So we're laying the groundwork for that.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciate the cost that's there, and I just hope that as we continue this dialogue, we can figure out a way to make it happen. I mean, I travel a lot, and I live on Uber, and it's just so easy to see where that driver is, how quickly he's going to be here in 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 90 seconds. We got to get there.
Yep.
And I'm hoping that can happen soon. If I can, I know Mr. Butcher was talking a little bit about some of the trials and tribulations of the first couple of weeks. I want to be definitively clear because I'm still seeing some emails that come through. One in particular from Chesapeake Bay Middle. Can we say that in week 4, are students getting to school on time?
In general, yes. Now, are there still a couple of problems that we're working on this week? Yes, we are, but we anticipate that they would be solved by this week.
I appreciate that, and I understand there's always a glitch, there's always a traffic jam and accident, but I hope that by the end of the 4th week, anything that is either driver-related, routing system-related, or something that is within, 3 standard deviations, these students are getting to school before the first bell. I think if we go into October, and again, outside of 3 standard deviations away, I always get, Fort Meade has an issue that we can't control, or, 175 has a hiccup that is just an abnormal thing. If we're going into October and kids aren't getting to school on time, something's wrong.
We're dealing with the last group of those now, and they should be resolved this week.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
There is one other wild card, Mr. Gilliland, and that really has to do with 2 things. Mr. Douglas alluded to it, but it is actually more serious than that. As the economy improves, we are increasingly seeing two things. Either folks don't initially want to become bus drivers because they have better opportunities, possibly better paying opportunities. And remember, most bus drivers are not full-time. They're by the hour, and they are not making a full 8 hours. So we have less and less people as the economy improves and more opportunities exist outside to initially want to become bus drivers, public school bus drivers. The second piece is, for example, as the construction economy continues to accelerate, et cetera, the federal CDL license that they hold is a valuable commodity. There's a value stored in that federally issued license. And if reliable contracting or any of the big players need more CDL drivers, it is not a big leap for them to market their positions to some of the folks to drive for us. And somebody could leave us quickly in the middle of a week, well past the 4th week of school, and leave us making $6, $8, $10 more an hour, and make 8 hours a day instead of 5 hours a day, with whatever benefits they offer versus our contractors. So we have seen over time that when the economy goes down, we have less bus driver shortage issues. When the economy improves, we have a tougher time initially recruiting, and then we have more defections on the retention side. And if you've been in a business long enough, like many of us have, we watched these up and down cycles and can correlate our driver shortages or inabilities to recruit and retain drivers tied to the robustness of the economy around us. I'm not at all saying that as an excuse, Mr. Gillan, but I think it's information that's valuable for the public to understand that there are some external influences that work against our ability to attract and retain CDL licensed drivers.
I wholeheartedly respect and appreciate that. I know we have that struggle as well with substitute teachers as the economy
and
rebounds.
Food services workers and subs, et cetera.
Before I had to resign from the board of directors for Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporations to join this board, and I would just say I don't know if it's been explored, and I know obviously some of these are contractors that we don't necessarily have exact control over from a hiring perspective, but I think a partnership with AAWDC, or we can arrange it, the State Department of Labor might be able to help with that a little bit. I just think we've got to, forgive the old adage, think outside the box. I think we need to throw the box away and just start to figure out how to resolve this, because I know if we're having the problem, Prince George's, Howard, Montgomery, the biggies are having the problem as well. And I don't know, what the thought leadership is in this area, but these challenges I know are widespread, and I'm just hoping that the gurus of all of the thought leadership can come together and figure out what a short-term solution is. Certainly we all want the economy to remain robust, and obviously some things benefit when the economy dips, but I just feel like we've got to get ahead of this. We really do.
And I really love that observation, because in fact we could say check the box, not that there are other boxes unchecked, but I have personally met with Ms. Mussog, Executive Director of AEDC. We've met with Workforce Development. We have attended some of their recruitment activities. They are on the lookout for us. And we've also reached out to Fort Meade for two reasons. So if the specific scenario that I'll allude to is if, for example, AEDC, which has to be notified, and Workforce Development Unit has to be notified, as well as DLLR, if a corporation is downsizing past a certain limit. What we've indicated to them is that if it is a firm that is of the type of business that has CDL drivers, so maybe they are a moving and storing type company, or maybe they're a logistic transport roadway company, even if it's Coca-Cola bottling company, we know that that business is the kind of business that has CDL certificated drivers. We've asked AEDC and Workforce Development to notify us of that, one, and to market us as an outlet. So if you're getting laid off from a logistics trucking company, Workforce Development has been explicitly asked to market AECPS as an opportunity for those individuals. And then secondly, because some, depending on what their capacity is in the military, some also do have the right initial CDL licensure. Now, certainly they may not have the passenger endorsement, but they have the underlying foundation for that. So we've reached out to the military establishment too, that as folks are retiring, folks are moving out to the military, we want them to understand that we are an opportunity, our contractors are an opportunity for them for second career employment.
One last question. I want to be respectful because we have a couple of cards up here of people who want to testify, and I know the hour's getting late, especially for some young ones in the audience too. My last question then, I obviously know the uptick in the economies, causing, issues with attracting and hiring bus drivers, but are we seeing anywhere where there is a supply of potential drivers, but they are not being able to pass the screening?
Oh, absolutely. But I don't know that you want to go there because...
Fair enough, it's late.
What? Yeah,
that's a deeper conversation, but
yes.
I know that we're seeing that in a lot of industries that deal with driving. People can't pass the drug test.
The bar is very high. I mean, there's a federal bar, there is a state bar, et cetera, and it's more. There's physicals, there's drug screening, there's disqualifiers based on prior convictions, et cetera. So there's a long list of items that would disqualify a potential driver, but those are in either the federal statute or in the two state statutes. Part of it's within MSDE, and part of it is within the Department of Transportation here, MDOT.
And even if there weren't those, you don't want just anyone behind the wheel of a bus driving our kids. So,
Mr. Grannon.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, I'm just thinking about this app issue, and I've in my 4th year now of sending my oldest child back and forth to school every day on a public school bus. I don't know what I would possibly do with this app, like how it would make my life any easier. And to tell you the truth, I have a concern that if we are going to do something like that, then we've got to figure out some way to have it coded or limited or something so that only authorized guardians or something could get access to that route for that child, because I could see how this would be misused. I don't see how this would make my life any easier at all as a parent of a young child. And to tell you the truth, I think the only misuse I could think that I might do with it is if I see the bus is running late, I'm going to take that much longer to get my kid to the bus stop, which is only going to cause more delays. So I don't know what the utility of this is, and it sounds like we might be better served using some of those dollars, for example, to shore up our ability to pay drivers better. So that's my 2 cents.
Your caution admonition is well placed, because reviewing some of the licensure and the disclosure documents that come with these give us pause for concern. Obviously, we are under federal requirements to protect information about our students and to protect our students from certain kinds of information, et cetera, and where that information then goes. So the privacy and the confidentiality elements of some of these technology company contracts are of such a nature that they would actually preclude us to begin to even utilize them at the outset. And then beyond that, then it's every single thing that you just mentioned, Mr. Grannon.
So now, having children that ride 4 different buses, I get kind of a microcosm of the good and the challenges that come out. So one issue that we saw that on one of our buses, and then I heard from other parents that there were some buses that were overcrowded at the beginning of school. How do we estimate how many students will ride a bus?
Well, in the past and right now, it's historic ridership. If a neighborhood usually yielded 25 elementary school students, we use that as we believe they're going to be 25. Obviously, with what Mr. Sheknovich said about the growth of the county, those are not as reliable as they were in a stagnant population. As we become more familiar with this program, and as the program generates more data for us, we could come up with a coefficient to use with this historical data. Meaning that, and let me, not to go too far here, but ridership at the high school is very low because kids stay after for sports, or they ride in with a friend who has a car or whatever. Ridership at the elementary can be low because parents drive their kids to school and pick them up in the afternoon. You can pretty much predict at the middle school that if there are 50 kids in a neighborhood, you'll have 50 riders. So between the three different levels, it changes. But if, as we collect data using the new system, if we find out that the coefficient would be 70% of the kids in this neighborhood generally ride, then we have on the map, which is new for us, we actually know how many kids in that neighborhood, and if we can come up historically with a coefficient of how many normally ride, let's say you have 100 kids in the neighborhood and you have a coefficient of 70%, we can more accurately predict the ridership in that neighborhood. Now, again, with growth, all bets are off, but we can get smarter with this based on the data that we're generating with the routing program.
When you find, I'm certain you track this, when it comes to buses being delayed or late or something,
right?
Do you find that certain contractors have more issues than others, or certain riders? Is that something y'all track and address with the different contractors?
Yes. In fact, one contractor last year had serious driver shortage problems. This year, the two that we've identified are not the one that had the problem last year. Now, coincidentally, he raised his salaries for this year. So there's a real high correlation between the salary going up and not having a driver shortage. But yes, that from year to year goes from contractor to contractor. If we have one that is chronically every year one of the problems, we'll start taking contracts. So we try to take work from them to somebody else.
And we in fact do that. We do.
Yes.
We'll take routes away from if a contractor cannot perform by change order. We have the ability, and Mr. Reinhardt's asked this question in prior times during contract award periods. We have the ability to either add routes to a contract or delete. So in this case, if we have a poorly performing contractor, we can take that route away, that bus away, et cetera, from that contractor by change order, and then add it to another contractor. But again, you got to make sure that the other contractor has a driver, has a vehicle, has everything to be able to support that route. So, you can be punitive on one end, but you have to be absolutely successful. You're going to be, or sure you're going to be successful on the other end.
So, now, another issue that we came up and I shared with the superintendent, and that I appreciate Mr. Mosier and Mr. Douglas that has been corrected, is the communication that was coming about bus changes, because we were having an issue with one of our buses, and I said, if this is happening to our bus, it's probably happening elsewhere in the county. And so I appreciate the increase that was given for communication coming out, the letters and the Parent Connect that came out. That was very helpful the second week after we'd had some delays. Now, I will say something. I've seen exactly what you're saying, that the new software generated some new start times and some new pickup times, yes. And then we found that in reality, they couldn't be met in that route. Out of my 4 buses, 2 have been on time perfectly every day, and one, the first week, we thought it was a little optimistic of how late they were picking up, and we found it was right. Because of traffic getting from, we're a magnet bus, so they travel farther. So getting from our house to the school was taking longer than I think what the software had optimistically anticipated. And so that was changed. But I will say it's made a big difference. My oldest is now catching the bus 30 minutes later than he did 2 years ago. That's a significant amount of sleep for a 7-year-old. So I appreciate those changes that have come through, and he's getting to school on time. So that was the
other side of that.
Right. So that was very positive. He's getting more sleep, and so that we've seen that the issues that have come about at our bus stop have been fixed over the past couple of weeks, and I appreciate that. I echo what Mr. Gilliland said, that I expect the first couple of weeks that the big concern is, are they being addressed and coming through? And we're seeing on our end that it is, and we're also seeing from the emails we're receiving from parents that things are being remedied as well. So.
I will say that we hit our target for getting this thing up and running this year, but the real, if we're successful over the next year, the real dramatic change will be how much smoother next September starts. Because even though it's up and running, a lot of the benefits take time to implement. So our vision is to get it up and running this September so that our next opening is dramatically better.
Are there any other board questions or comments at this time? So we do have some cards for public testimony, and I appreciate y'all being so patient. I know this is late. So Suzanne Coleman, Kara Morris, and Troy Signa. Sorry.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Coleman. My statements are regarding middle school walkers to Lindale. We live in Linthicum Heights on East Maple Road, just east of the light rail stop. The cutoff for middle school walkers is 1.5 miles. Surrounding Howard County and Baltimore County are 1 mile. Our kids are expected to cross 3 major roadways, along a Royal Farm store to cross active light rail tracks, and down a secluded foliage-shrouded path. Our local families have grave concerns regarding this walk to school. Our community is unique in that children are directed to cross train tracks on foot and down a darkened path to get to school. According to Anne Arundel County Public Schools' published safety guidelines dated August 2018, families should develop a walking route that minimizes their exposure to vehicular traffic. Shortcuts through isolated paths, woods, or across railroad tracks can be dangerous. AACPS is telling us to avoid these scenarios. We are the only community in Anne Arundel County where children are expected to cross train tracks 2 times a day to get to and from school. We say no children of any age should be crossing those tracks on foot. Elementary school kids at LES on the west side get a bus to school despite being less than the required mile distance. But for middle school kids traveling in the opposite direction, it's considered okay. The reasoning is not logical. Our delegate and the superintendent toured the area in August. The train was out of service due to track washout, and all was uncharacteristically quiet. In addition to the inherent risks in taking this path are the persistent nuisance and criminal elements brought in by the light rail. Residents, including myself, have witnessed loitering and homelessness, open drug and alcohol use and intoxication, public urination, chronic panhandling, and trash picking, high and passed out drug addicts, and disturbances of the peace. I propose a cost-effective and effortless solution to this serious situation. Make an exception and allow the students who live east of the light rail tracks, but less than 1.5 miles from school, to ride the bus. This is the equivalent of what is now allowed for elementary school kids on the west side. Use the already existing bus stops on East Maple and North Camp Mead roads. This would require no effort from the county, no added buses or drivers, no added stops, no route alterations. AACPS would merely need to allow these children in this catch-22 to step on the closest bus. There are plenty of seats. The cost involved is already committed. It's safer to walk a few yards than requiring kids to walk the route put forth by AACPS. Safety is everyone's concern, I presume. Further, it is a colossal waste of taxpayer resources to exclude these children from riding these buses. I've sent many emails to the Department of Transportation and received tone-deaf policy responses. They are now ignoring my emails. I implore the board to carefully consider this difficult situation and that approximately 60 families in Linthicum are forced to deal with daily for the sake and safety of our children. And I thank you, and I apologize for my nervous voice.
No problem. Thank you, Ms. Coleman.
Hi. My name is Kara Morris, and I also live in Linthicum, and I have a son who is a 6th grader at Lindale Middle School. I would ask the board to consider the totality of the circumstances under which our kids are expected to walk from the east side of Linthicum to Lindale Middle School. When you put together the train tracks, the illegal activity to which Ms. Stillman referred to, and the secluded wooded area, it's hard to believe what we're requiring our 11-year-olds to do in every single day. I understand that the board's or the public schools' way of addressing the issue is to provide crossing guards at key locations. Crossing guards are important, but what are they expected to do in the moment in the face of illegal activity? Also, there are no crossing guards in the secluded wooded path that makes up part of the approved route. If safety is truly a priority, then please make an exception to the 1.5-mile threshold and allow affected kids to ride the already existing bus that stops on East Maple Road. Thank you, and I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Morris.
All right, my name is Troy Sigmund. I'm a parent of a High Point elementary school student. He rides bus 75. We got a letter in the mail saying he can't ride the bus anymore because he's over first grade. He's 0.7 miles from the school on a heavily trafficked road. They want him to go over guardrails, down back roads with no sidewalks. And we tried to contact everybody we could from the Department of... Sure! They just keep giving us roadblocks. It's horrible. But we've taken pictures, we mapped out distances, we signed petitions, but every time we go to the Board of Transportation, they say, well, it would take, you guys say, to get this bus reinstated. It's pretty upsetting, us. I have documentation here that I would like to provide to you at the end. But basically, they sent us a cease and desist letter. When the block across the street, which I can see from my house, my son cannot get on the bus. He has to walk, is what they're telling us. And it's 0.76 miles over a guardrail, and these are elementary school kids. These are 6-year-olds. So we're just here to ask that you guys look into the matter, and we thank you for your time.
Dr. Armato.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sigmund. Is your contact info? Did you put your contact information on this car on the card?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I can have somebody reach out.
I have. We also documented that there's other bus stops that are less than the 0.1 mile, but they get a bus because they have to cross the Ball. But our kids still have to cross the Ball. They want us to backtrack through the neighborhoods, 2 neighborhoods, and come back down on the Ball to a crossing guard. But it's over a mile.
Thank you. I'm not familiar with it, so as soon as we finish, and I'm hoping to finish soon here,
Okay.
I'm gonna walk down and
Thank
get
you.
that information from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Butcher.
I think now would be the appropriate time after the folks that you just heard that we make sure that we're expressing not just a thanks, but what the board actually has control over it for purposes of changing bus stops or not. So, do we have any control over that, Dr. Armato?
So there are a couple of people. So the short answer is no, but several things have been brought up by the 3 speakers. So let me see if I can parse that out a little bit. So in terms of determining where the bus stops are going to be and the times they're going to come and go, that's under my purview, and that's what our staff does. What was mentioned here is when it talks when we talk about, or when it's brought up, the distances of walkers versus riders, and that's where this board would have more input and say in terms of the distances, where you heard that there are some counties that are, so we divide ours between elementary and secondary, which is middle school and high school, whether it's a mile or a mile and a half where you have to walk or you get bus service. And that's a decision this board over the years, just in the short time I've been here in 13 years, has looked at those numbers and compared it to other school districts. We are about in the middle of the state in terms of those distances, but that's where the board would be more involved. So in terms of the stops themselves, the start and stops, the times of those stops, that was in the purview of the superintendent, but the board would have some input in terms of distances if it wanted to change those distances. I think you'd heard the recommendation to bring them in, so but you would then be providing more transportation for more students. But that has been looked at by boards other than this in the past.
And what has this specific board been presented with for purposes of complaints or issues dealing with the differences between the distance, whether it's a mile and a half or a mile?
0.
Okay. Has that been provided to your staff, those complaints?
We've had some, absolutely. We've had some emails and phone calls about people that would prefer us to change those distances.
And so the stuff that would come under our purview that would, for this particular board, when is that information going to be presented to the board, short of people coming to the board meeting?
Well, it would be a matter of the board wanting to put that on a policy agenda to review the transportation
Well, I guess
policy
my
and regulatory
point-
language.
I guess my point is, if we don't know, because your staff is getting it and it's not communicated to us, how would we know to put that on the agenda?
I think a number of board members have been getting emails from constituents with some of those concerns.
In addition to...
Right, but we've not been, every single one of them, if you're asking, are we relaying those to all the board members? The
Correct.
answer is no, we're
Okay.
not. So you're right, you would not know if you've not received an email personally, then you've not gotten that from me.
Mr. Grannon.
So this is in partial response to Mr. Butcher's question. So the answer to the question was that the board doesn't control which bus goes where and that kind of thing, but we can certainly direct Dr. Arlotto to report publicly on the outcome of the issues that were raised tonight, and I'm certainly making that request. I mean, if we're having transparency, you know, if we're going to have public questions, we need to have public answers. So I'm asking you, Dr. Arlotto, at our next meeting to say what the outcome is of each of these things. For example, what I understood of it, Ms. Coleman's request seemed completely sensible. So if that can't be done, then I think that answer needs to be given publicly and an explanation as to why it can't be done.
And that will be up to the board to direct me. So if the board chooses to do
I'll
that,
second
I'm
that.
glad to do that.
I don't think we need to vote on that. We don't need to vote on that.
Guess I'm done talking.
I'll second
We got two.
So, and just to be clear, Dr. Arlotto, when the individual issues come up like this, these issues, as with anything in the board, they can also, there's an appeal process that someone can go through about a bus stop or something with that. So that could work its way through the system as well if we don't receive many of the complaints that come through because the staff handles them and it directs them, so we don't get reported every time something. But if someone is still unsatisfied with the response, they can go through the appeal process and appeal the school system's decision up to the board level, correct?
Correct. Staff is supporting policy and regulatory language as written.
Which includes exceptions.
Which does include exceptions. And those are decisions that staff makes and recommends to me.
All I'm saying is let's give the answers publicly. The questions are raised publicly. Let's give the answers publicly. It's only half of the issue to raise the questions publicly, and then the resolutions are not public. It's abundantly clear.
Well,
and two board members have asked for it, so that's what we're going to do.
Dr. Arlotto. Dr. Arlotto.
If we talk about the resolution, so I'm not familiar with the High Point, so I'm glad to look into that, and I thought I made it abundantly clear that I would begin to look into that process. I thought I did. That I was not familiar with it, and I would look into it. I am very familiar with the Lindale Middle School walking situation. As was reported, I went out with not only Delegate Beidel, but with the director of the crossing guards, that is under the sanction of the police department, as well as the new Northern District Commander and several of his deputies. And we met, we walked the route, we discussed what the various options were. And as was reported, it was during the summer, and at the time, because of some flooding prior to that, the light rail station was closed. I since went back out Tuesday, as a matter of fact. I changed my schedule purposely so nobody knew that I was going to be going out. If they saw my calendar, they'd think I was going to be somewhere else. And I went out and parked the car, and I went and walked. I introduced myself to the two crossing guards. I learned what I could about the situation. We have families that live within 1.5 miles on the east side of the tracks that are within the walking distance as set by policy and regulatory language that are walking to Lindale. Are they crossing Camp Meade Road? And the answer is yes, with a crossing guard. Are they crossing light rail tracks? Yes, with a crossing guard. Are they walking down a pathway that is partially wooded? Yes. That then ends at Music Lane, where we asked at that time, where in previous years there had not been a crossing guard, we asked them to add a crossing guard, which the police department have done. And I checked to see that all the crossing guards were there. I spoke to 2 of the 3 to determine the issues, the safety, to see if they had any suggestions or concerns. I believe it to be a safe walking route from the neighborhood to cross the street with a crossing guard at the fire station, where the Royal Farms is that was mentioned in the testimony, across the light rail tracks with a crossing guard and down the pathway to another crossing guard that gets them across Music Lane and up to the school, where then there are 2 crossing guards right in front of the school. So I believe that it is well covered, and I believe it to be a safe walking route. I am not recommending to this board that we change that we change anything with that group. Yes, are there buses that run through the neighborhood, which is being suggested that students could get on? The answer is yes. But then that would be the case for any other neighborhood within a 1.5 mile radius where there are buses that are not completely full, where students are walking to school and they're passed by a bus that has seats. We would then have to allow all students to do that. So I am not recommending that change.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. Arlotto, to the best of your knowledge, are there any other schools that require students to cross the tracks?
None that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, whether it's freight rail or commuter rail or light rail?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so this is a unique situation then?
Indeed.
Do we have, we heard in testimony it's approximately 60 families that would live in that zone between not far enough to ride a bus, but would still have to cross the tracks?
The number that I have gotten most recently is 17.
17 families?
17 families within that 1.5 mile radius living on the east side of the tracks that are attending Lindale Middle School.
And do we have data, whether it's anecdotal or actually collected, that would tell us how many children are crossing the tracks daily?
I don't have any data that I can collect. I'm not counting heads. I was there at a snapshot in time. And like I said, I was there during the summer where I didn't see any students, and so I wanted to make sure that I went back after school had gotten started to see if students were into a routine. The 2 crossing guards that I introduced myself to and talked to said that as of now, there are 0 middle school students coming from that east side and crossing the tracks with the assistance of the crossing guard. In the morning, they say they're seeing maybe 2 or 3 students in the afternoon, middle school students.
I notice you're careful to call it middle school students. So elementary school students should not be crossing the tracks.
Correct.
Because we provide buses.
Correct. But I choose my words carefully. Thank you. Because while I was there, an elementary school student did cross the tracks with their father. So on the west side, and this was a family choice, the father likes to walk his son to school, and he walked his son across the tracks with the use of the crossing guard, across Campney Road with the use of the crossing guard, and then up to the elementary school, and then the father returned and went to work. But that's a choice.
And for our community high school, North County, that's more than a mile and a half from the tracks, so those students wouldn't be impacted.
Right.
So it's really just our 17 families we're looking at.
Middle school students, yes, sir.
Okay. Of which 0 were observed
by the crossing guards now
morning.
3 weeks, almost 3.5 weeks into the school year.
So they haven't assisted any students in the first 3 weeks crossing the tracks?
Not in the morning. They say there are a couple in the afternoon.
Okay. So I have reviewed the policy just personally, and the language is a bit vague with consideration of various hazards on a walking path. I would like to bring that back to the policy committee for our upcoming meeting, just to look at perhaps tightening up that language.
Mr. Grannon.
I want to thank Mr. Reinhardt for his question, because I think when he asked, are there any other paths that involve crossing train tracks, and the answer to that is no, that provides a very logical reason why this would not lead to the parade of horribles and open up some can of worms where we have to do this for every single route. There's a special natural geographical issue that needs to be taken into account. 2 board members have asked that each of the questions that were raised tonight in public be answered in public at the next meeting, so that's going to happen.
I think I just answered the first one to the board. I think I just answered the first one, and I said I promised I would talk with the parent, and I'm going to get some more information on the second.
Now, the question was the feasibility of Ms. Coleman's proposal to respond to that? And your answer said that you're not doing it, but it didn't address the feasibility of it.
Ms. Urea.
Thank you, Madam President. I second you, Mr. Reinhardt, on bringing that policy up, and I think we should maybe also review the walking distance for elementary school students specifically, because as brought up at the meeting tonight and previously, there's been like problems with the distances for elementary school students, and I know personally I would not trust my little sister that's 7 years old to memorize a 0.76 mile walk. So I think that's something we should look at maybe.
Mr. Reinhardt.
I concur. When we have our policy committee meeting on the 17th, would it be possible to bring, I know we don't like to mix dollars with safety, but it is our role to also be fiscally responsible with taxpayer funds. Would it be possible to get a financial breakdown of costs for each of the different walking distance for our various students?
Are there any other board questions or comments? Is there any more public comment? Okay, I'm sorry, ma'am, you've already spoken on this one. You've only spoke one time. All right. Okay.
My name is Amber Taylor. My daughter and son also attend High Point. The buses have been canceled as of this year, October 1st. My daughter's been riding that bus for 5 years with no issue. The route they want them to take is not only down streets that do not have sidewalks. So when it snows, they'll be walking in the street. Past a registered sex offender's house, down Duval Highway, who has a shoulder that is no more than a foot wide. That's a major road in our little area. When it snows, it's supposed to be a bad winter this year. Those kids are going to be in the street. My 6-year-old son will be walking in the street of a heavy traffic area. The school's also under construction, which, with any school under construction, it's a mess. Currently, High Point is gorgeous on the inside, it's a mess on the outside. The parking lot is restricted, drop-off is restricted, and it's gotten to the point where parents are kind of getting a little desperate and stopping on Duval Highway and letting their students out, which is extremely dangerous, period. Taking away the bus stop, we have probably 20 kids who ride that bus stop. It is an active bus stop. The bus is halfway empty. The bus stop is for kindergarten and pre-K only, apparently. The kids have been riding this bus for years. So picking these kids up does not add any expense at all. The kids have been doing it for years. The stops are active, they're regular. With them being the way they are, there's no crossing guards. So the kids will cross over Notley Road with no crossing guard because it's been a bus stop. And when they get over to Woodlawn, which is part of the route, there's still no crossing guard because it's been a bus stop. We haven't had them, we haven't needed them. So they're going to be needed. So making them walkers is adding expense. So I would really, really like them not to walk. It's going to be problems. It's going to cause more parents dropping the kids off, more parents picking them up. And then we have parents who have a kindergartner and a third grader. So one of the kids are riding the bus, the other one has to walk. It's just not logical for a family. It's you got one parent who's standing at the bus stop with their 5-year-old, the other parent who has their 7-year-old who has to walk almost a mile to school. You want to be the parent taking your kid, but you don't want to leave the 5-year-old at the corner. It's easier to keep it.
Thank you. Mr. Butcher.
Ma'am. No, thank you for it. I'm just curious because I want to see how this process works. Prior to you coming up and making this statement, did you voice a complaint or an issue with the route?
We spoke to the PTA. The PTA suggested us coming here. They posted we have a little PTA Facebook page saying that they had contacted transportation, things like that. Transportation said it's board policy, it's under a mile. There's nothing we can do, period.
Okay, so it was only the PTA. You didn't reach directly to
I did not directly. Speaking to the other parents at the bus stop, I knew to come directly here. There is a waiver for the bus stop prior to my children's bus stop, though. because Duval Highway does not have sidewalks. They do get picked up, and they're closer to the school than my children.
Did the PTA ever report back that they actually contacted the public
Yes,
schools?
because the transportation sent a letter to the bus stop prior to ours that is on Duval Highway and retracted it because their stop is a valid bus stop because of the danger of Duval Highway. So those kids will continue to be picked up. So they had to exempt those parents and let those parents know, oh, I'm sorry, we shouldn't have sent you the letter. We take it back. Your kids can still ride the bus, but the rest of you, your children cannot.
Okay.
So that's a fun moment. But,
All right, thank you for answering.
anything else?
All right. So that concludes the Board of Education meeting. Our next general meeting will be Wednesday, October 10th at 10 a.m. The next budget meeting is Wednesday, October 10th, 1 hour after the board meeting ends. And the next policy committee meeting is Wednesday, October 17th at 1 p.m. Do I have a motion to adjourn? So we are adjourned.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. I am your host, Gaston Gomez, and today we'll be having a candid conversation about culture and education with our next guest, Joe. Joe, welcome. I am thrilled to have you in our show today. So please tell us about you.
Hi, my name is Joe Viatorik, and I work with the Magnum programs here in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I'm the teacher specialist.
Great, great. So where were you born?
So I was raised in Salem, Massachusetts, and I've been in this area, in the Baltimore area, for about 30 years now.
Salem. Tell me a little bit about your hometown.
Sure. So